Well, pleasure to see you. I'm Margaret Heritage, and I see that you have one of the books I've written about formative assessment, which Paul's right, live, breathe, eat, sleep it. So I do know something about it, and I'm looking forward to working with you on the topic today. So thank you for being here. Before we get started, I am going to be asking you to work in groups or to work with at least a partner. So I see you have somebody, you do? Do you want to pair up then, and or maybe make a 4 here? Whatever works. I just don't want you having to sit and think on your own. That's great. So I don't know if you know anything about me at all, do you? You do? Okay. You don't? I don't. And yet you came. And yet you came to this workshop. You don't know anything about me. Goodness, you must have a lot of faith in the people who put on workshops here. Well, what shall I tell you about me? I've been in education for longer than I'm going to mention, because at one time I used to say, oh, I've been in education for X number of years, and people say, oh, you don't look old enough for that, and now they go, yeah, okay. So I'm not going to mention anything about longevity in education, but you can probably tell I'm from the UK originally, been here a long time. And I feel like I've done everything in education. Started as a classroom teacher, was a principal, I've been a university teacher in the UK and here. I've been head of a principal of a public school in the UK, head of a private school in Los Angeles, principal of the laboratory school of the Graduate School of Education in UCLA, and then I worked in a research center in UCLA, and now I'm trying to retire basically, but I'm not doing a very good job. But next year is going to be different for me. So I've got a lot of different kinds of experience, and really been focusing on formative assessment, I would say, for a good 25 years, if not a little bit more. And it's a topic that, you know, since I've lived in the United States, I've been here, I came when the Berlin Wall fell down. That was November 89. Or was knocked down, rather. And I've seen formative assessment, you know, increase in ascendancy, particularly over the last several years. So I'll be interested to know why you're here, what you're interested in. As Paul said in the introduction, this is the first of a series of 3. So I'm going to take different aspects of formative assessment in each of the 3, and I'll explain what those are as we go along. The first major thing, though, I want to do today is to give you an overview of formative assessment, you know, what it is, what it isn't, because there's still a lot of misconceptions out there. And then to really look at some of the elements of formative assessment and how it works together. But we're going to take out some of the elements over the course of the 3 sessions and really go into detail about them. And I'll explain our focus as I go. Apparently I can't wander around too much because I'm being filmed. I forgot I was being filmed. I haven't really done much of my hair, but anyway, there we are.
Your nails look lovely.
Oh, do they? Okay. Let's keep the nails the forefront then. So formative assessment then, and it sounds like people already know quite a bit about it, but I'm going to do a little warm-up in a moment just to get a sense of who knows what in the room and get us oriented. But first of all, start with this cartoon. You may have seen this before. In the first box, 2 boys and a dog, and one boy says to the other boy, I taught Stripe how to whistle. And the boy leans over, listens carefully, and says, I don't hear him whistling. And the boy said, I taught him, I didn't say he learned it. Well, of course, that's really what formative assessment is about, to make sure that your students are learning what they need to be learning minute by minute, day by day. Now, it's easy to say and much harder to do, but that's the basic orientation. I think our science colleague over there said the keeping learning moving forward. I mean, you sort of talked about it as a daily event. Well, actually, it's not an event, it's much more of a process, but something that occurs as part of classroom practice. And we're going to be focusing specifically in our in-depth look today, when we get to this afternoon, on learning goals and success criteria, because any assessment of any kind is linked to a goal. So the end of the year assessments are linked to the standards. How many of you in the private schools here actually follow the Common Core state standards? Most of you do, yeah. Maybe not to the letter, but it informs what you do, yeah. And so I'm going to give you your learning goals for today. So this is what I'm hoping you're going to learn. I want you to leave with an understanding of what formative assessment is and what it isn't. I want you to understand where formative assessment sits in the big assessment system. Because we do have, again, I'm not familiar with your schools, but I would imagine that you do have an assessment system, assessments of different kind for different purposes. Formative assessment is really a feedback loop that occurs on a continuous basis in the classroom, and I want to talk with you about how that operates, what it looks like in the classroom. And then, as I said, our element that we're going to pull out for this session is learning goals and success criteria, because they really drive the whole process. If you don't know what kids are going to learn, and then if you don't know what they'll be able to do if they've learned it, then we're a bit stuck. We're stuck both from an instructional point of view, but we're also stuck from an assessment point of view. So this is going to be our focus today. And then a theme that's going to go throughout, because this is so critical. And actually, you know, sometimes I think, well, I really should start with the classroom culture. But the nature of the classroom, the relationships, the organization, the expectations, the routines, all of that can either inhibit or support formative assessment. And, you know, we could say it inhibits or supports teaching and learning, but we're focusing on formative assessment in particular today. So those are our learning goals. That's what I want you to leave with, an understanding. And here's how you should know if you've met those goals. So the first thing I want you to be able to do, explain what formative assessment is and what it's not. So if somebody back at your school says to you, okay, you learned about what formative assessment is and what it isn't, so please explain this to me. I want you to describe the components of a feedback loop. What are these elements, what are these components that operate together as a feedback loop? Explain how learning goals and success criteria drive formative assessment. So be thinking about this as you go along, and this is exactly the kind of thing I want you to be doing with students. This is part of a formative assessment process where kids are really clear about what their intended learning for the day is, and they're also clear about how they'll know if they've learned it. I want you to apply your understanding of learning goals and success criteria to create them. So I'm going to give you some time to practice with learning goals and success criteria. And then explaining how the classroom culture can either support or inhibit formative assessment. Okay, so what do you notice about those success criteria? What do you notice? Anything at all? Yeah, they're the indicators, if you like, as to what it means to understand something. So in there we've got, they're able to describe, they're able to explain, they're able to apply. Okay, and those are the kinds of words that you'll see and hopefully will be using with your students so that they know, they have a sense going forward in the lesson, what is it that I'm supposed to be able to do? And what ultimately does that help the student do? They know, yeah, they know where they're headed. And what we want is for kids to be self-monitoring, able to assess their own learning, all part of being a 21st century adult ready for college and career. And so formative assessment is a way to, you notice how I'm doing the nails so you can really see them? Yeah,
I'm enjoying
getting that. The cameraman said he's getting them. I hope you'll edit that bit out about nails. And so this is what we want. We want kids to be able to monitor their own learning, adjust their own learning tactics if they need to. So this is all part of the process. So any questions here? Because I'm going to have these at each point in each session that we're together. But this is today. And at the end of the session, I'm going to come back to these so you can do your own self-assessment. Where do you think you are in relation to these criteria that I've established for you? Okay. So here's the agenda. I'll try and stick to it. I put 45 minutes for lunch, but I should scratch that and make half an hour. Mark told me the wrong information. I can blame Mark. He did. He told me 45 minutes. So you can see how we're going to chunk these and spend the first part of the day before the break really getting a handle on what formative assessment is and what it is not. So definitional clarity is the goal there. And then after the break, we'll really get into the idea of the feedback loop, what formative assessment looks like in the classroom, and then give you a chance to apply your learning to the learning goals and success criteria development. So I really want you to go away today with a good sense of learning goals and success criteria. And then we'll finish the day with the classroom culture. So that's the day, folks. That's what I got. Now I'm doing this plane check. You know how they do when you get on planes? That's the destination. If this isn't where you want to go, you can deplane. All right? Otherwise, we're in here together. We're on this flight together. Okay? Everybody all right with this? Because this is what I got. So, all right. So let's start then with what formative assessment is. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a warm-up here. What I'd like you... Oh, I need to stay more in one place. What I'd like you to do... As I read statements, I just want it's either true or false. I don't want you to discuss them. I just want you to think for yourself. Is this a true statement about formative assessment? Is this a false statement? So two purposes here, eliciting prior knowledge for you to raise that, get your schema oriented to a formative assessment, and also to help me get a sense of where you are in your own thinking about formative assessment. So first one then, is it true or false that formative assessment is a good idea but there's no research to show it works? Don't shout out, just in your head. It's integrated into daily classroom practice. True or false? Helps teachers keep students learning on track to meet lesson goals. True or false? Formative assessment is used to give grades. True or false? Oops, let's go back to these. I thought I had one more. We'll do the answers to this slide first. So, formative assessment is a good idea, but there's no research to show it works. True or false? False. False. Yeah, actually it's very false. But it depends how you define formative assessment in terms of how it works. Formative assessment is not a series of mini tests. In fact, there's no such thing as a formative assessment or formative assessments with an S. It's much more of a process that's integrated as a feedback loop into the classroom. And there is a lot of research. So I'm not going to spend time talking about research, but I always think it's important that folks know that what I'm talking about is grounded in research and also in evidence-based practice. You know, what I've seen in classrooms, what I've seen and heard from teachers. If you want to know more about the research, you've got the book. You can go and have a look at that. So I'm not going to spend time, but there is research to show that when it's implemented effectively, it has advantages for student learning. Integrated into daily classroom practice. True. Actually, we talked about that earlier, so everybody should have been oriented to that. It's something that's, some people call it a pedagogical process because it's just integrated. It's the way you do business in the classroom. Helps teachers keep students learning on track to meet lesson goals. True. And this is the important part of formative assessment. It really operates at the lesson level. 1, 2, 3 class periods. It's not waiting till the end of a unit, it's not waiting till the end of a course, it's not waiting till the end of the year. It's minute by minute, day by day. Where are my kids now? what do they need next to move forward. And as you've all said, students have a whole range of needs. So it's really about each student. Where is this student now? And how do I move this student forward as far as it's humanly possible within a larger group? Formative assessment is used to give grades. False. False, false, false. What are grades? Grades are a summative evaluation. It's an evaluation of kids' learning. Unfortunately, grades also encompass a whole range of other stuff often. But if I'm trying to learn something, then at least give me a chance to learn it, like a driving test. You know, give me a chance to learn to drive, and then you can test my competence, okay? But while I'm just working through some of these complex, you know, you were talking about some changes you make in your math. You want kids to be learning these deep ideas, these disciplinary practices, and they just don't happen overnight. So we want to know how kids are thinking, and the whole point of formative assessment, and remember this, it's about getting qualitative insights into student learning as it is in development, not at the end. Qualitative insights. Okay, ready for another one? Okay, one more slide. Okay. Formative assessment is a specific type of test. Well, I already gave you the answer to that. Formative assessment involves teachers making adjustments to their instruction. True. There is not one single way to obtain evidence. True or false? True. Formative assessment is used at the end of a learning sequence. I already told you that. And student self-assessment is part of formative assessment. I already told you that too. So it's not a type of test. And formative assessment is really assessment that informs ongoing learning. So you want that steady stream of evidence. And the good news is, folks, that if you have a well-constructed lesson with well-constructed learning tasks, then there's going to be formative opportunities in that lesson, already built in, already embedded. Now, so it's not about making more tests. So if any of you came here thinking I'm going to talk about how to make a test, I'm not. But next time I see you, we're going to really go into the evidence, you know, the lesson planning, what the tasks, and I'm hoping our subject matter colleagues are going to be really helpful in that, helping us think through quality tasks that can be used as formative opportunities. And so not one single way. If you saw before, I had explanation, applying, describing. You think about those opportunities in the lesson for kids to give explanations, descriptions, or apply their learning. We already talked about it's embedded in ongoing teaching and learning, and the student role. In fact, you said earlier about coming to find out things that are new. I think formative assessment, you know, as with everything, it evolves. People's ideas, people's implementation evolves. And what we're seeing now is a huge focus, and I think this goes along with the idea of more self-regulated learners, more independent learners, kids who are college and career ready, who can actually have good communication skills, negotiate, take feedback, give feedback, plan their own learning, monitor their own goals. All of those kinds of things, which are now the goals of students exiting high school. So it's not just, you know, content goals, it's all of these other attributes that we want kids to have. And as that has become more prominent in thinking, then formative assessment is actually evolving much more into the realm of let's really think about how this supports those dispositions, behaviors that we want our students to be applying. So that's part of the evolution. And that'll be the third session I do with you when we really get into the student role. So today's going to be the learning goal success criteria. The next part will be the evidence, the actual getting evidence, and then what you do with it, going back to how you use it in the classroom. And then the third session I do with you will be focused on the student role specifically. What are we expecting students to do, and how will they do it? And I have to tell you, I'm going to show you video throughout, but I'll show you some video in the third session of kids, and it's just extraordinary what students can do. I mean, you know yourself, I mean, I'm talking to experienced people. You know what they can do when they're given the opportunities to really engage in learning and monitor their own learning and plan their own learning opportunities. So here's where we are then with our... Now, any surprises? We're a small group, so I want to make sure that we have lots of time for conversation. Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper now then into what formative assessment is. So as I said before, it's a type of assessment used to inform learning rather than measuring it or summing it up. So, give me some assessments that measure learning. And it's not that they're good or bad, it's just that it's different assessment for different purposes. And we'll go into in a bit more depth when we look at the comprehensive system. But what would be an assessment that measures or sums up a period of learning? How many of you take the Smarter Balance end of the year? Yeah. So that sums up a whole year's worth of learning in relation to a sampling of the standards. So that's not what formative assessment is. It's about informing learning. Where are my kids right now as they're learning this, and what do I need to do to make sure that they are keeping on track to get to where I want them to be at the end of the lesson? So it's less assessment that focuses on learning as it is taking place. And as I said before, we want all students, and you know, there have been a lot of changes in this country in the last 10 years. Well, certainly the last 8, the introduction of the new standards, which have demanded, you know, a lot more deeper learning, a lot more high-level thinking, just a more rigorous approach to learning and what we expect kids, you know, deep conceptual understanding, the disciplinary practices, and so on. So it's assessment as learning is taking place, and the idea is to move it forward from where it is to where it can go next. Now imagine. So, remind me, can I use you as my prop here? So, what is your name again? Remind me, Carol? Lynn. Lynn, well, close. So, probably, you know, when I'm definitely retired, teachers will be able to go bzz to a kid's head and think, oh yeah, proportional reasoning, you've got this little problem going on here, here's what I need to do. I can't do that right now, so I have to get inside the student's head by externalizing their thinking. Remember, by what they say, do, make, or write. So, either by explaining, what am I having you do? Explain, apply, describe. I've got to access that thinking. I've got to find out what is the student making sense of right now. And a friend of mine who is a very prominent scholar in Europe in this area, Christine Harrison, she always says, and I think this is really helpful, that formative assessment is much more about partial understanding. What are kids partially understanding right now? I mean, I'm sure our subject matter experts over there will recognize that. You know, what's a sort of concept in science that kids might grapple with? So that's a concept they're grappling with, and we need to sort of figure out what they're grappling, what's going on in their grappling brain, so that we can help them gain that understanding. And so it's not that they're just going to know this and then they know this. It's some churning, it's some productive struggle, it's some figuring it out. And we need to support them to do that. So that's really what formative assessment is about, helping us get into their thinking. And moving learning forward from its current status for each child. Each one, and I think about 3 of you mentioned differentiation specifically. So it's each student. Now, I'm not stupid enough to think that you're going to give kids a diet of one-on-one instruction. Maybe occasionally you need to, but that's neither practical nor desirable. But as far as humanly possible in the context of a classroom, and that's when you come to the culture, when you come to the management, how you set up expectations and routines for kids, then you're able to pinpoint where certain students are and then move them forward from that particular point. And somebody I heard recently, you know, we say we want all students to learn. Well, if we mean all, we mean each one, right? Each one. So formative assessment is really about helping each kid to move from where they are on a continuous basis. Now, as you well know, some children are going to move much more quickly than others. Others are going to need more support along the way. Others are going to advance more quickly. But everyone is going to move forward from where they are. So that's basically what formative assessment is about, informing learning. And this is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite thinkers in education, Jerome Bruner, who has always been his thinking has always been a big influence on me. And he died either last year or the year before, maybe it was 2016, age 100. Isn't that amazing? And this is what he says: good teaching is forever being on the cutting edge of a child's competence. So wherever that student is, the job of the teacher is to move forward from that cutting edge. Because if you're not on the cutting edge, then I don't really know where you are. But each and every child, and I think if you think about formative assessments as helping you be, and again, I know I'm talking an idealized form. I recognize the realities of the classroom. But I think here we're looking, we're trying to keep the vision, the shining vision on the hill. And this is where we're headed with formative assessment. So the point of formative assessment is to keep them in which zone? Which zone would you say here we want kids? The what? The learning zone, yeah. The learning zone. The comfort zone, what happens if you're in a comfort zone? And I don't mean about not feeling comfortable in class. I'm not talking about that. I mean, we want all kids to feel comfortable. But just your comfort zone. I mean, what do you do to be in, well, maybe I shouldn't ask what you do to be in your comfort zone. But, I don't read hard books if I want to be in my comfort zone. Or I don't watch challenging programs on television. I just want something that I can chill a bit. Panic zone, definitely we don't want them in the panic zone. What happens if they're in the panic zone? Nothing. Shut down. And I would say a lot of kids in our schools are in the panic zone. I mean, I don't know about your schools, but I do know a lot of other schools, and a lot of kids are in the panic zone, particularly our English learners, who have no clue what's going on, because the instruction isn't created to support our English learners. And so the whole idea of this is what students can do next with assistance. That cutting edge, where are they now, what assistance, and that's basically what teaching is in my book. Where are they now, and what's the assistance I'm going to provide from all my repertoire of pedagogical strategies to move them forward. Okay? Is this making sense to you? Yeah? It is? Good. Well, that's a relief. And as I said earlier, formative assessment is for both students and teachers. One thing I didn't tell you that I was, before I moved to the United States, I was an inspector of schools in the UK. So you can imagine how very popular I was, me and my colleagues, to inspect. In fact, we used to be called advisors. And then Margaret Thatcher came in, remember her? And we were overnight turned into inspectors, not advisors. But we always used to say schools, you can't inspect without advising. So looking at classrooms, as many classrooms I did, one of the things that I always used to look at, in all the schools where I've been principals, is who's doing the work in this room? Who is doing the work? And invariably, it wasn't the person, it was the teacher and not the kids. We want the kids to be doing as much work, if not more work, as the teacher. And so it's for both teachers and students. And as I said, this is something that has really become very prominent, especially in Europe, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Notice all the countries that do better than us on the PISA tests. Just saying. This idea of student involvement, and I do see it, I think it's gaining currency in this country as well. I do a lot of work at the national level. So I see I lead a group of states, for example, in a collaborative. Unfortunately, California is not one of them, but it's been so surprising to me how these states, you'll say, what's the ultimate goal? And I mean, I nearly fell under the table at the last meeting when the representatives from Arkansas were talking about personalized learning, and our goal is self-regulated independent learners. And I thought, wow. I mean, I'm not being pejorative about Arkansas. I think, there's a lot going on there. But it wouldn't sort of leap into people's mind as the most progressive state in the nation, would it, really? And so when I heard this, I thought, we've got to be paying attention. People are paying attention. And so somebody said, I think it was you, that the vehicle, or somebody talked about formative assessment as a vehicle. It really is a vehicle to support students in their own learning, in regulating their own learning. And that's what we'll focus on in session 3. And why? Hello? Because they're the ones that actually do the learning. I mean, we can help them, but they're the ones that actually do it. So we need to provide that assistance. Okay, let me stop there. Just react to the people at your table about what I said. What's swirling around in your mind? What makes sense? What questions do you have? I'll give you 2 minutes just for a quick elbow partner conversation. You wouldn't make those assumptions about your group, your class, because you know the kids, and you know them as learners. I mean, I've never met you before. I'm just taking it on face value that you are competent professionals who, if you had a question, would raise your hand.
What would you say after that to confirm?
Well, I'd say, okay, so Jennifer, explain to me X, Y, and Z. Or does everybody agree with that? Or could you connect those two ideas together, please? Okay. I would never see, one of the things that would never work as formative assessment, because you have kids sitting there, yeah. So, but I'm not going to do that with you, because A, I don't think you'd like it. You might. And B, I've come in here with some assumptions about you as professionals who are able to say, no, I don't get that. You've been through the education system, you've obviously been successful in it, or you wouldn't be sitting in this room. So I'm making but I would never make those assumptions about children. And this is why I just hate this idea of, teachers, I do formative assessment, I do thumbs up, thumbs down, I do exit tickets. No, thumbs up, thumbs down. Oh, I know where my class is. Of course you don't. Unless you say, okay, why's your thumb up? Explain to me. And then you'll find once you start saying that, explain to me, or talk to your partner, then tell me, or I'm going to listen into your conversations. We're going to go into a lot of that in part 2 when I see you. But what I said was really an opportunity for you to raise your voice, and you didn't. So I'm not going to stand here and say, hey, you, Jennifer, come on, you must have a question, right? Does that help? Yeah. But you wouldn't make those assumptions about your kids, because you know who they are. I mean, even if you don't know who they are on the first day of class, you soon get to know who they are. But anyway, I would never make those assumptions, because you really don't know why kids are saying, yes, they get it, or no, they don't, until you actually dig a bit deeper with them. So a lot of conversation with students.
Thank you.
That's a good point, though. I'm glad you raised it. This is why I give you the opportunity, because you kind of folks have really good ideas and good thinking. And to me, it's, I'm going to show you a video in a moment, and you'll see an example of kids regulating their own learning. But to me, it's all these micro aspects of the classroom. It's not enough to just say, and I'm not saying you do this, but you can't just say, well, take responsibility for your own learning. It's all those small stitches that you weave into the fabric of the classroom so that kids know, like learning goals and success criteria. And you say, well, explain to me where you think you are with the success criteria. You think you're meeting your goal? If so, why? Excuse me. Beg your pardon. So it's all these little stitches that you weave into the classroom, which I'm hoping we can unpack in the 3 sessions we're together. And we'll see some of that in a couple of videos. So we will touch on it today. I mean, you can't really look at formative assessment without thinking about that. And I didn't mean to be facetious about waiting, but that's when we're really going to go in depth. But we will touch on it today. And when I show you the videos, let's just keep that in mind, your question, and really unpack, you know, what are those small stitches in the classroom that are contributing to this? And that's the nature of the classroom culture, the nature of the school, setting it up that, you know, mistakes are okay. You should be making mistakes. Because mistakes are, you know, I've been very fortunate with my mentors over my career. I remember somebody, incredible educator in the UK, saying, you need to understand that errors are sources of new learning. And when I heard that, I thought, yeah, my kids need to understand that. You don't keep making the errors, but what can we learn from the fact we made this error? Okay, so let's go into some more detail now about these practices. So I've got 5 core practices that really make up this idea of formative assessment, which I think the field has more or less settled down. Some people still agitate, mainly measurement people who just can't cope with the fact that classroom teachers might have some clinical skills. But it's true, I'm on their case the whole time, seriously. And they know it. So, and they still keep asking me to go and talk to them. You'd think they've learned by now, wouldn't you? So anyway, what are these that make up this process? Well, ta-da, we can't do anything unless we know the destination. Where are we headed? How will we know if we got there? And then this idea of eliciting and interpreting evidence. So how are we getting evidence while the learning is unfolding? We're not going to give them tests. And that's not to say you can't give them a test, but believe me, the test had better give you instructionally tractable information. It had better be matched to your lesson goals, and it had better not just be a case of got it, didn't get it. It's a case of where are they now in their thinking that we want to get at. So enlisting and interpreting evidence, and of course you're going to use the success criteria. If that's where you want kids to go, when they say things or they do things, you're going to be interpreting that in light of the success criteria. And then this is the point about formative assessment. It's immediate, i.e. in the moment in this lesson, or for sure the next lesson, or the next class period, I should say. And if you keep going on and on and on without making any adjustments, then you've probably lost the plot, if you ever had it in the first place. So, and it is the immediacy. I mean, people say, well, you can use any assessment for formative purposes, and that's true. You know, end of the year summative, if you have that and you see that all of your students are across the grade level or there's some major weakness, what are you going to do? You're going to do something. Investigate, make some changes. So that's forming a decision. But it's very different from this embedded formative assessment minute by minute, day by day. That really becomes part of your lesson. Feedback to students. That'll be in probably straddle week session 2 and 3, because that is so key in formative assessment, is feedback. And then the final one is the whole idea of student involvement through peer feedback and self-assessment. And when students get feedback, we want them to be able to use that feedback. We want them to be generating their own internal feedback through self-assessment. And of course, they can't do that if they don't know what the heck they're supposed to be learning and how they'll know if they've learned it. So these are these 5 practices of formative assessment. And these are pretty consistent now across the globe in terms of how formative assessment gets operationalized in the classroom. This isn't just me saying this, even though that would be good enough, obviously, but this has been operationalized across the board, really. So let's take a look now. Let me just see if you've got any clarifying questions. I just want clarifying questions if you're not sure what this means, because I want you to look at a video clip in a minute and see which of these that you see. next time I'll bring some video of, I don't have any kids with, you know, severe social emotional issues like you're talking about, but I do have a video of students with significant cognitive disabilities being engaged in formative assessment and mild moderate. And in fact, as we speak, I'm just editing a book now about formative assessment for students with disabilities. We haven't really looked at the emotion, but this is an area that's not really been addressed very much. And of course, a lot of what you do is going to be how you assemble the evidence of the learning. So maybe I'll dig around and see what I can find, because it's really interesting for everybody, you know, when you see. But I work very closely with the school on Skid Row, and they had tons of kids with emotional issues, and it was implemented successfully, but they didn't all have issues. So you definitely have challenge with that. So we'll keep that in mind as we move through some of these examples, you know, thinking about how that can relate to your students. Thank you for sharing that. Well, yeah, for sure. They're a lot easier to implement with 20 or 23, but everything is, right? I mean, anybody who's taught knows that my critical mass was 26, 27. Once I got over 27, I really knew about it in the classroom. But then it really comes down to how you organize the class, how you foster independence. The Skid Row school I was talking about, this teacher with her kids with social emotional challenges, she had 35 in the class. 8 of them had IEPs, most of them were English learners, not to mention all the trauma that they had. And she's one of the best exemplars of formative assessment I've ever seen anywhere, ever. So it can be done. I remember doing a session in Los Angeles Unified, and this algebra teacher came up to me at the end. He says, I have 46 kids in Algebra 1. How do I do this? I said, with difficulty. But actually, if you've got 46 kids, it's an even greater imperative for you to do it. But so much of it comes down to classroom management, the expectations and the routines. I can't even tell you. I mean, I've done a lot of work across the country, and I can't even tell you how many times we have just roll up our sleeves and say, okay, let's think about classroom organization. Let's think about the routines, the expectation, the structures that you've put in place. And anybody will tell you, I mean, one of my stars as a teacher in Arizona, an AP teacher in a very high-performing school in a very high-performing district. And she really has moved to, and I'll be showing some of her classroom video in the 3rd session, to where kids are taking much more responsibility for their learning. And what was wonderful, she, last year was the first year she taught AP, and she decided she was going to do this about turn. She thought, well, if my scores are terrible, nobody's going to bother, because they'll just say, well, it's my first year. And so I was encouraging her to do various things, which she did. And then I got this email saying, I am crying. And I thought, oh no, with joy. She got the best AP scores in her school, in her district. And this is high performing. And she said, you know, she really spent the first it's kind of going slow to go fast, getting the room, getting the expectations, just going slow so everybody knows what's expected and they know what they're supposed to be doing. And it really is worth it. And she's an absolute testament to it. I'll be sharing some of her classroom video as well. So, good question, but it can be done. But I can't tell you how many times we have to go back to basics of how to organize a classroom and how to think about learners and learners managing themselves. Okay, so now you've all got handout 1 on the white piece of paper here, right? And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to show you a video clip. This is from a New York City public school classroom, and it is a regular New York City public school. I've had so many people say to me, well, is this a private school? No, it's a regular New York City public school. And These kids have been, it's a writing class, middle school writing class. And the video is pretty heavily edited. Are you cold? I'm so hot, because I'm walking around and waving my arms around, and you're hot. She's fine. But you look like you're cold as well. Are you cold? Are you just a cold person? You just run cold? Okay. I won't worry too much about that, if you're okay. All right. I don't want people to be uncomfortable. So anyway, this is a pretty heavily edited video, but I just have certain highlights that I wanted you to notice. So on your sheet, you'll see you've got these practices. And I would like you, as we go along, to make notes about what you saw that might have any relationship to what you have down here. Okay?
To what? Relationship to?
To these to the 5 practices. So do you see her focused on learning goals, success criteria? Do you see her eliciting evidence? Do you see student self-assessment? And if you do, what is it? Quick notes about what it is you see, and then I'm going to have you share in your group. So let's hope that this works.
Okay, so you have been working on your essays. And one of the things I noticed when I was looking at your essays last night is you guys have moves. Like, you know something about essay writing. I was looking through all of your essays, and I was thinking about some of the things that you know about how to make strong arguments that you've learned since you've been here and in your writing work. You guys know that essays always have a strong claim. You know that the claim has support, has reasons, that there's evidence for every reason you make, that the intro should hook you and set up the essay, that there's a conclusion. And the thing that impressed me the most about your writing was that you also know that essays often have a counterclaim, where you name, what would someone say who disagrees with me, okay? What we want to do today is, I'm really proud of you. I feel like you're ready to lift the level of your essay up a little bit. You've got the foundation down. Now let's build a building. So the way we're going to build the building of your essay to make it feel like it's even better than the way you know how to write it now is we're going to take a look at one of the paragraphs of an essay that I found out in the world. And we're going to look at what do authors do when they're trying to make really strong arguments or they're trying to be really persuasive, okay? So I'm going to read this. You see first about how long this body paragraph is, right? One thing we see is that authors sometimes do a lot of things when they're trying to make their points strong and persuasive. So I'm going to read this piece, and what I want you guys to think about is what is it that this author does that makes his body paragraph strong and persuasive? Okay, you got it? All right, let's read. In addition, big business at the expense of the real neighborhoods surrounding it. Okay, so let's take a second, and with the person sitting next to you, can you turn and talk about what is it that makes this part of an essay feel strong and persuasive? Okay, turn and talk.
And like, back to the idea that you said the big stores should be there.
Shut it down. The area that has a sports arena, because it's like all about sports. Nobody wants to go all the way somewhere farther when you could just like strong argument. It's like he's kind of showing both sides of the view. Because he's bringing like something that someone who wants to have that arena there. He mentions things that are good, and he also mentions someone who doesn't like it.
So he not only has the counterclaim, but he doesn't want to saying, this is why the counterclaim isn't as strong as my claim.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, guys, let's come together. Let's come together. So let's hear a little bit of what you noticed makes this piece of an essay feel really strong or really developed, okay? Let's hear, Ryan and Nitin, you were saying something that felt really strong.
Yeah, I was talking about, like, the story had a lot of specific details.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that the evidence or the details the author used wasn't just general, that he got really specific or precise. Can you cite a line in this essay that does that work?
When he was saying that the Triangle Sports Store on 5th Avenue, it shut its doors, like it closed, because there had to be a new store there because it didn't fit in the neighborhood.
Okay, so instead of just saying as its evidence, some stores shut down, and that's really sad. They were really specific by naming the Triangle store. Really nice. So we can say that one way we can develop our essays is that we can add really specific, or sometimes people say precise, details as our evidence. Really nice work. And can you turn and talk? And can you name what are 2 things on this list or anything else that you noticed that you think you want to do to your essay that this author did to theirs? Turn and talk.
Stating it, but we don't have back
was to put more emotions. Like, kids get bullied, right? And then they have lots of emotions. I didn't add that, and like that's what I want to add so I can relate like how they felt when they were bullied. So that's what I need to add to make this a better essay, and you know, to make it more persuasive.
So, class, your work today is going to be to revise your essays, okay? And you have a couple goals for how you're going to revise them, but know that you obviously can do any of these things if you feel like your essays need that work, okay? I have a feeling that your work on your essays is so big today that you're probably going to want to start over on a new piece of paper, right? And say, okay, my foundation is laid, but instead of trying to add things to the margins, that you'll want to go ahead and say, let's start from scratch and make sure we add in this new stuff as we go, okay? All right, really nice work today.
Okay, so what did you notice? Just share with your partners, what did you write anything in any of the columns, and if so, what was it? What did you see related to those components of formative assessment? That is from Teachers College, Columbia University. I don't know how many of you know Lucy Colkin's work or have been to Lucy's institutes. You have. On her, she gave me permission to use that. She said, provided you don't charge any money for it. I thought, I'm not going to charge money for your videos, Lucy. But if you go on the Reading and Writing Project website, you know, and even if you're not an ELA teacher, there's superb videos of K-8 ELA Common Core lessons. And not one of them's formative assessment. Lucy Corkins, if you just go to the Reading and Writing Project, Teachers College, and just click on videos. She doesn't have anything beyond K-8, but some of the stuff she has is just well worth looking at. So I notice a lot of people say, well, I like this and I like that. So just let's have a quick go around. What stood out for you in that video? What really caught your attention? Because I heard quite a bit of, I like this or I like that. Nikki's point about self-regulation, to me that's one of the stitches. You know, it's one of the little stitches in the lesson that, okay, now you decide what it is. Now, contrast that with certainly my experience of school, and I suspect, even though it was a gazillion years ago, it's not atypical, of getting a paper back from the teacher full of red pen, do this, do that, do the other. Who's actually done the learning there? Well, the teacher already knew it. You know, you need these invitations and some structure to be able to think about them so you can take that learning forward for yourself. I'm glad you raised that about the poster with the feedback, because sometimes I advise teachers not to give whole class feedback, but you hit the nail on the head that even if I think, well, did I really do that? I've still got this there for me to think, well, maybe did I do that? And if I didn't, perhaps I can strengthen that. But it's very much down to the individual, the student. Now look at differentiation. Let's think about differentiation in that. How was that lesson differentiated? Multiple entry points. The same goal, but there were different entry points. So if you were, and in fact, one of the things she does in the lesson, and you can see the whole lesson on Lucy's site, she actually pulls 4 kids together while the others are doing their revisions. And she works on conclusion because they are much further ahead with their writing in the kind of development. And so she gives them a mini lesson. She's about 15 minutes with them on conclusion, and it's really substantive what they do. So another point in that differentiation. But could she spend 15 minutes with a kid if she had all the other kids coming, please miss, can you help me with this, that and the other? So it goes back to the management, the expectations. But there's multiple entry points for kids. Everybody can access. So they had to do that thinking about how am I going to take what I have. And I heard you say it at your table, and that's another source of evidence for her. The second drafts, how much have they understood from that mini lesson where she's got the mentor text she's working from, and that they've incorporated into. So it's another source of evidence down the line. And then fast forward, then the opportunity for her to give feedback to those individuals. She's got some sense of how they've used that, those criteria in their essays, and she can still give feedback about, here's where you might think about this, or could you consider? Again, invitations, not directions. Most middle school teachers it's kind of, who's middle school in this room? None. Okay, you are. Well, most middle school teachers are just in awe that A, the kids sit on desks and don't start punching each other, and B, that they actually turn and talk when she says, and they're focused on the learning. Yeah. They are, I'm telling you, I've been all over this country. I show that video a lot because I think it's so rich. And they do. Well, how come she does that? I bet that's a private school. I said, no, that's a regular New York City public school. This school on Skid Row I was telling you about, I wouldn't even mention the state. I showed it a video from Skid Row, and two teachers said to me, that must be a private school. I said, no, it's on Skid Row in Los Angeles. No, I don't believe it. That's private. They see kids engaged in learning and immediately think it's cultural capital at work, and not, an engaging learning environment where kids want to learn because that's the orientation of the classroom. Oh, it's just unbelievable. You have no idea what it's like out there, let me tell you. It's really rough. And these are people who actually want to learn about formative assessment. At least you're not sitting with your arms folded like, yeah, show me. Actually, your arms are folded, I'm noticing. But I get a lot of teachers, okay. So that's formative assessment at work. That's what we mean by embedded in the classroom, those practices. None of which we saw in great detail, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to give you a flavor of a classroom where formative assessment is at work. And like I say, Lucy didn't put that up as this is formative assessment in the classroom. What she did put up is this is exemplary teaching. Therefore, this exemplary teaching, it's going to have formative assessment embedded as part of the classroom practice. So, I'm behind on the agenda, but don't worry because we will catch up. But I do want you to have, let's see. Let me just finish this section, and then, are you okay? Do you desperately need a break, or can you hang on 5 minutes? 5 minutes, okay. So, one of the things that I'm going to pepper throughout this, these 3 sessions I have with you are teacher voices. And, I've done a lot of work with a lot of teachers in this country, and you're doing 3 sessions on formative assessment. Some people spend a year. I mean, I developed a course that's it's a year-long course basically, and some of the teachers who went through it, I'll just echo some of the things they said. After the year, they were asked to reflect on this prompt. I used to think that formative assessment was something that happened at the culmination of a lesson. Now I think formative assessment is a continuous process throughout the lesson. I mean, and that's what we saw. We saw that those practices happening in that lesson. So let's just conclude here with, and this, what formative assessment is. This is my summary. So formative assessment is intentionally. It's not serendipitous. It's intentionally obtaining evidence in the course of continuous teaching and learning through observation, discussion, questioning, and review and analysis of tasks and work. So that's how it gets done. And when I see you next time, we're really going to go into this, looking at lesson planning and what those formative opportunities are through observation, discussion. And just think about her. She's Kate Roberts, actually. She's written a book called Falling in Love with Close Reading, which apparently is very popular, the teacher you just saw. But just think, if she, you know, if she weren't sitting with those 4 kids that she wanted to, what else could she be doing as the students are involved in writing? What else might she be doing during their independent writing? Walking around, talking to the students, asking them, why did you decide to do this? How will that strengthen your essay? All of that. So she's getting more evidence as she's going around, not sitting there doing her grades. So it's not giving the test at the end of an instructional cycle or on a predetermined basis. You know, those are the other things we talked about, the benchmark, the more summative tests on a predetermined basis. And I'm sure you have those in your school calendars, you know, that you have different assessments at different times. And they give different information for different decisions. And I'll talk about those after the break. And so we know this, gauging how student learning is progressing while students are in the process of learning. So it's not like Kate Roberts gave them a lesson on, this is how you write this kind of an essay, now go write it and I'll grade you. You know, it's in development, it gets deeper, she's adding layers to it. It's not evaluating student achievement at the end of a sequence of learning, that's grading or end of chapter tests or whatever, end of the unit test. Again, this immediate or near immediate. So it's not about, okay, well next week I'm going to do this. Well, no, today or tomorrow, next time I see these kids, I'm going to do this based on what I know. And it's not using test data to make decisions about medium and long-term goals. That's not the plan. We'll get back to that after the break. And the idea is not grading, but descriptive feedback, like she did. Here's what you can do. Here's what I see you can do in your essays. There's no scores, there's no grades. There's descriptive feedback that they can use to advance their learning. So we're not grading or reporting, that's for a different purpose at a different time. And then finally, involving students in the assessment process through peer and self-assessment. And that is really why they need to know these goals and criteria. If they don't know where they're headed, and they don't know what it looks like to get there, you know, these exemplars. And those of you, I'm hoping our subject matter colleagues can help us think about what might exemplars be in math or in science, to help kids understand what the actual goal looks like when it's achieved. And that's not cheating, by the way. One teacher said to me a few years ago, other side of the country, well, that's cheating. No, actually it's not, but let's not get into that right now. And it's not just telling the students the results of a test. We want students, as you very nicely have pointed out, it's about students making those adjustments as well, based on the feedback, based on how they're thinking about how they're going. So if somebody asked you, check success criterion 1 or 2, could you explain what formative assessment is and what it is not? You know enough you could give an explanation. You might not want to stand up in public, but at least, you know, but at least you're there. Okay? Comments, questions? My next thing was going to be, what's at the top of your mind? Ooh, what's that nasty thing doing in there? What squares were you thinking and what's circling around? So you can think about that while we have our break. What's at the top of your mind? What's circling around? You know, let's just pause, have some think time, some talk time. Okay, so I left this up. Is there anything that, I tried to get rid of that line. Anyway, I'll stop obsessing about it. Maybe you hadn't even noticed. In the middle of top. Yeah, it's kind of annoying me, so let's get rid of the slide as quickly as possible. So anything that's just, you know, free associate, anything bubbled up, anything on top of your mind, anything circling around, or ready to move on? Where do you think you are in all of this? Thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. Actually, that was way up, so, okay. Oh, I was just saying I wanted to inject some some commentary from teachers, like the I used to, but now I, that I shared. Yeah, yeah. I just think it's helpful when you see how teachers have shifted in their thinking, because the reality is, folks, that this is a big shift in classroom practice for very many people. I mean, you imagine the traditional, I talk, you listen, I give you a quiz, then we move on. And, you know, that's still a prevailing paradigm. In many, many classrooms, I do the talking, because I know everything. You do the listening, and then I give you a quiz, and then we just carry on. That's not the kind of teaching we're talking about anymore, folks. And that's not to say we don't want direct instruction, we do, but that doesn't engage the kids to the degree that we need. Early childhood. In fact, they're some of the best exponents of formative assessment, early childhood folks. And mainly because they don't stand and talk at the kids. The kids have a lot of experiences that the teachers can interact with them during and gain a lot of insights from what they're doing and how what they say when they respond to questions and engage in discussion. Yeah. In fact, I think it's an easier uptake in elementary school than it is in high school. High school teachers are a tough crowd, I'm here to tell you. Anybody who works with them knows. Apologies to high school teachers, but you are a tough crowd. And I think we're seeing quite a bit of changes in how people think classrooms should run. And it isn't on the old paradigm anymore. Because you can't do formative assessment. And who knows whether kids are learning anything or not. They're just sitting listening. Most of the time they're probably checked out. And it doesn't really engage the students as learners. That responsibility you were talking about, it doesn't give them the chance to take that responsibility like we saw in Kate Roberts' class. And little children can do it. In fact, if you're still with me, in the third visit, I'm going to show you some extraordinary video of little kids giving each other feedback in first grade. Yeah, they can do it. Is that surprising to you, or did you think it was more of a high school? And that's unfortunate because kids, it's a way of learning. And if kids have a completely different experience across the school, that's why it works so much better when it's a whole school approach. And it doesn't mean that every teacher is going to be a clone of everybody else, but these practices. And one of the reasons that I wanted to engage with disciplinary folks this time is because the nature of the discipline is different. And how you share exemplars in science or how you help kids get to goals in math is going to be different from what we saw with Kate Roberts. The kind of evidence you get, how you it's all different within the disciplines. So I'm hoping that we will be able to get to that quite a bit more in our webinars, the disciplinary nature of it. So there are programs like that where it's built in. I mean, that's because curriculum developers have discovered that this is a selling point if you have this built into curriculum materials. So thank you for the recommendation on that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to show you a video next time when we talk about collecting evidence of a math class. And she has kids use color quite a bit, so you'll see that next time. Okay, so before we really switch gears into some in-depth work now on the feedback loop and then into goals and success criteria after lunch. All right, so let's now look at, because I think it's important, and I don't know if you know, but I wrote the first draft of the ELA, ELD assessment chapter for California for that framework. And I was pretty amazed how much of what I wrote actually stayed in there. It was quite surprising, really. And one of the things I've heard from people is how useful it is to see where formative assessment fits within the bigger system. Now, I know that you, perhaps in private schools, don't share the the assessment system in quite the same way as perhaps public schools do, but nonetheless, you all have assessments, right? I'd be really surprised if you didn't. So let's take a look and see how formative assessment fits in with this bigger picture. This notion of a comprehensive assessment system, so that there are different types of assessment for different decisions. And as we go through this, we'll think about the different decisions. If you're an administrator, you want assessments because you have decisions to take as an administrator. If you're a curriculum developer, similarly, or you're in charge of professional learning, these different assessments. But the one assessment that is within the purview of teachers is formative assessment. So if anybody tells you that gives you assessments to do and says, you do this, this is formative assessment, you can tell them that Margaret Heritage says, get lost, right? Because this is you. You decide who's getting the evidence, when you're getting it, who you're getting it from, what you're going to do with it. That's you, because you're the teacher. This is part of your realm. So we know in assessment that one size does not fit all. We need a range of assessment types to give decision makers. And if you're a teacher, I want you to be thinking about, well, we know you're all going to use formative assessment process, but what other assessments do you use in the system as well? So if we look here, we've got you see the college and career ready student, and if you think about this over the space of a year, so you've got this classroom formative assessment. Notice that it's really proximate to the student. It's close to the learning. And I do have a version of this in the ELA, ELD framework, but actually this is a much fancier version. But nonetheless, this stayed in the framework chapter, which I was amazed by. So the classroom formative assessment, close to the student, it's in-process evidence. You're getting evidence during the course of teaching and learning. You're making adjustments, the kids are making adjustments, right? That's what we've been talking about. So it's informing learning. And notice it's the smallest grain size. Right, because it's the smallest chunk of teaching and learning day by day, okay? Then we get to the more formative formal checkpoints. And I don't know how many of you use progress monitoring, you know, in systems, multi-tiered systems of support. I would think you would do. This is where your progress monitoring comes in. You're not going to give progress monitoring assessments on a daily basis, but it's going to be a lot more frequent than some of these other assessments. You want to see if you're measuring impact of the intervention. Are you implementing, concluding, continuing the intervention? There's also the other point here. I mean, think about Kate Roberts. How might she do a formal checkpoint? At the end of all of this, she may well get the kids' work and really do a careful, thorough look at it all and decide she's going to give them a grade. That's a much more formal checkpoint. Okay, but it's not that in process. It may be at the end of the week, you know, in a math class, you've been doing a lot of problem solving and you just want to spend your weekend reviewing the kids' work. It's when you start to, you know, really spend some time. Or it could be that you give them a formal assessment and you want to see where they are. But it's not one of these on longer term goals. It's linked to the shorter term goals. Okay? Then we have the classroom summative. So this might be the end of a unit. And here's where you do grading, reflecting on the next steps and thinking about, well, how well did I teach that? Did my kids bomb? And of course, if you give them the classroom summative before the end of the unit, then guess what? You've got some time to do some more support for kids who may not be where you think they are. So you know, these are sort of checkpoints on your informative assessment in process. You've got these other little triage moments of checking. And again, we're reporting, we're grading. You may speak to parents about this, but this will help you with a narrative to parents about how kids are progressing in process. But unless you've got, believe me, I've been head of a private school. I know how obsessive compulsive some of these parents can be, that they want information every day about their child. This is going to give you the information every day, but let's help our parents not be so obsessive compulsive and wait until an appropriate reporting period. And then we have the interim. Some of you mentioned that this morning. Those are more the medium-term goals. So public schools often give them 3 times a year, say. And it's quite a useful check. When I was principal of the lab school at UCLA, I demanded that we did some interim benchmarks, and the teachers went ballistic. They hated it. We know where the kids are. I said, you know what? I want to know. Because you can look at trend data with that, which is important. If kids are really falling behind, they may need supplemental intervention. If you've got some improvement strategies, either as a school, a grade level, or a teacher, they help you measure the impact. And if your interim benchmarks are on the same scale as the end of the year, like the Smarter Balanced ones are, then they're predictive. Are these going, which kids are on track to meet the standards and which kids really are falling behind? But on the other hand, there should be no surprises if you're doing this every day. But if there are surprises, then that tells you something about your in-process formative. And then finally, the end of the year. Really, what are the, where's student achievement relative to the standards? And then you can, year to year progress. And districts use them, states use them. And the idea is to inform improvement planning. So all of these are built on this progression towards the standards, with the little ones being those tiny little grain sizes, those learning goals, those daily learning goals which come from the standards. And then at the end of the year, you get the largest grain size, because that is covering the sampling of the standards. I mean, as you well know, they don't assess each standard, which people get bent out of shape about, but they'll be testing the whole year. But it's a sampling of important learnings that are inherent in the standard. And the idea is that the little learning goals should feed into the bigger ones, the bigger ones, the bigger ones, so they're all connected. Because one thing we're moving away from, folks, big time, and we'll think about that more deeply this afternoon with learning goals, this discrete atomistic pieces of learning. That we learn this, got it. We learn this, got it. We learn this, and there's no connectivity, right? But now we're going for deeper substantive learning. So the nature of how you design lessons, how you decide on these learning goals, that they're substantive, they're not atomistic little, well, I'm going to identify the sides of a rectangle. Well, great. But, is that really worth you coming to school for? We need more substance. I see a lot of people struggling with that. These substantive learning goals. I don't know where you are with it all, but in the field. And for the county people, I see a lot of it in California. I don't know if that's you, but we still have a lot to do with teachers and the standards. But yeah, but that's just my aside. That's your job. Okay, so makes sense? Yeah, how much time, how much of teaching and learning, if you think you've got a whole year's worth of teaching and learning that is ultimately sampled by the end of the year assessment, then the grain size is the smallest chunk. So if you think about in-process formative assessment, that's a lesson. But that lesson needs to be connected to other lessons, and medium-term goals and longer-term goals, so the kids are getting to deeper learning. Then you have the formal checkpoints. That might be 1 week, it might be 2 weeks. And then you get to the classroom summative. Think about it as a unit, maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever, or longer. And then you get to the interim, and that's really assessing probably a quarter, 6 weeks, something like that. And then you get the biggest, the sampling of the year. So that's what I mean by grain size. It's the coverage of the amount of teaching and learning. Good question. So where do you see yourself in there? Teachers, what assessments do you use? I mean, obviously we want you doing this minute by minute, day by day, but where else do you see yourself? It could be a cumulative test. It could be tests along the way that get rolled up into a final score. It could be that. It's really, this is intended to show that you're summing up the whole year's worth of learning. But it could be a cumulative test. The bad news is that those out there, I'm afraid my psychometrician friends, think that, oh, if we're doing in-class formative assessment daily, then we can roll that up into a final score. Well, I'm unprintable on the topic. I mean, basically the idea of formative assessment, you make whatever evidence you have as out of date as quickly as possible. In this lesson or certainly in the next. So, you know, the idea of the rolling it up, but that's where you would see it, you know, in your system. And when you ask them to justify their thinking, or explain their thinking, or justify their reasoning, or justify their strategies, that is a great sorter of the goats and the sheep. You can really see who. Oh, I come out with all kinds of British things. You'll just have to you know, try and be a bit more bicultural today. Yeah. I try not to use it, but you probably know that British English is just full of idioms. And, you know, I say things, and my colleagues keep a little book going of all the things I say. And sometimes I just can't think of anything other than idioms, so apologies. But it means you sort out the ones who are really understanding. And I always remember when I was at the lab school, Kumon math, I don't know if that's as, yeah. So kids, you know, I'd had this girl who was doing some really quite challenging fraction problem. And she was explaining her strategy or how she solved it. And I said, but so why did you do that? Clueless. She just learnt the motion. She'd learnt, that's not what we want anymore. So learning to go through the motions without really understanding what it was you were doing. So that's a great getting deeper. Can you explain? Can you justify your thinking? And that's one of the, you know, that's all over the Common Core. Yeah. Explanation, justification. In science, in using evidence, it's across the Common Core and next generation science. Well, you still have, you still got to teach that kid, and you have to teach the kid from where they are. That edge, because what happens if you don't meet them right in that learning zone on the edge, you know, they're going on and gradually they fall and they can never get out. They fall so far down in that pit they can never get out. So I mean, I think in the private sector you've got a little bit more opportunity to actually meet kids where they are, I'm assuming, than some of these public schools who have pacing plans, and if you're not on this particular topic or this particular page, this point, that's not how kids learn. But what I do know about formative assessment, anecdotally, is that teachers tell me that the kids learn more because it becomes a quick fix. That you have an issue, Jennifer, so I figure out what it is, I intervene right there and then, hopefully you've moved on. If you haven't, I do something else. But I'm meeting you where you are, which may be very different from where you are, and so on. And that's why I need to be able to get at kids in the lesson so that I can have those interactions with them. And that's where differentiation comes in, because I'm responding differently based on your thinking. And we'll talk more about that in the second session, using evidence and responding to evidence pedagogically. But that's really where the differentiation is. It's not about giving different groups. I mean, you can do that, but it's really about responding to where kids are. And it might mean pulling 2 or 3 kids together for the moment, might be me talking to one, or it may be I just got to stop the whole class and say, you know what, I'm seeing a lot of people are struggling with this, let me just provide an explanation. Okay, that's where the differentiation comes in. But the formative assessment is meeting the kids where they are. And if you're not doing that, then some kids are going to learn in spite of you. We know that. I've seen plenty of those in my time. And others are just going to be left behind and fall deeper and deeper and deeper and never being able to get out of this pit that they get themselves in, or that we permit them to get in. So that is the ideal, that you're moving. I remember some teachers in an inclusion class that had a lot of special education students, and they said to me, our kids just learn so much more because it's a quick fix. You know, we see where they're struggling and then we can just respond in that moment. But if I'm standing up doing all the talking all the time, then I'm not going to know where you are, and I'm not going to be able to sit and say, hey, let's just take a minute and look at this again. Or I need X, Y, and Z together so that I can, I was in a class, oh, it was just breathtaking, elementary classroom, and the teacher has the kids' photographs on a little chart, you know, a daily chart, and she puts their photos. These are first grade, and so they know based on her evidence who she wants to meet with that day specifically. And so she says, and these are the people I'm going to be meeting with. And the others know that that's their independent work time. And it's literally got to be an emergency for them to interrupt. And in fact, when I was in the classroom, a little boy comes up and he says, Miss Lozano. And she said, I'm working with X, you know, you're interrupting me. He said, yeah, but her photo's not up there for today and you're talking to her. And she said, well, I decided that I needed to do that. But, you know, the kid, it's these sort of little routines that, you know, back to what I was saying to you, those little stitches, it's everything that you think about, and planning. So, but if you don't have independent skills among your students, it's going to be very hard. Next time, I'll remember to show you the video of this class on Skid Row. I don't show it so much now because it's pretty old, and she talks about keywords in math, and I just get beaten up so much because apparently they don't talk about keywords in math anymore. But it's such a great interaction, and it goes on for about 5 minutes in this class of 35 kids. Nobody interrupts her. And they're all involved. So I'll make myself a note to show that next time. Because it's too good of a video, even though she does talk about keywords. I was on a platform at a conference in Alaska in January, their state conference. I don't know if you know a woman called Karen Karp. Are there math people here? Anyway, I really respect her, and she respects me. And at one point I said, so Karen, can you tell me why keywords are out? So half an hour later, I'm black and blue, you know, I'm sort of staggering out. And, oh, thanks. So I had it chapter and verse why they're out. Out. So any math people in this room using keywords, stop. You might have, it's like when science people, they don't want the learning goals shown at the beginning of the lesson. It's like, get over yourselves. Show it, you know, have them engage in the learning goal when it's appropriate for you. I mean, science people, I've been beaten up so often, I just always say, okay, you science folk, you decide. But if you don't know the goal, then I don't know how you set up your investigation or your explorations. Okay, so there we have our college and career ready student. Right, before lunch, we are going to focus on formative assessment as a feedback loop. This is the big picture, and then we're going to delve into the red zone in the afternoon. Okay? This is from the literature and informative assessment, and there are basically 3 guiding questions. Where am I going? Right? What's the destination? Which one of those practices is about where am I going? You've got the practices written on your handout 1. The learning goals and success criteria. Where am I going? Where am I now? What's one of the practices on your that corresponds to that? Where am I now? the evidence, the interpreting the evidence, and then where to next. Which practices are involved in where to next? Self-assessment, peer feedback, teacher feedback. The rest of them. Where to next, yeah. And so we're in the red zone now. Tomorrow, next time, not tomorrow, we're going to be in the blue and the, I don't know what colour, orange is. And then the third week we'll be looking at all three from the student perspective specifically. And the whole idea of this is to close the gap. Now, this is from a seminal paper by an Australian, Royce Sadler, in 1989. And you know, in any discipline, there's just these foundational seminal papers, and this is one in formative assessment. And he talks about the feedback loop to close the gap. Now, you all remember No Child Left Behind. It probably wasn't so much of a scourge in the private sector as it was in the public sector. When everybody was going to be proficient by 2014, the achievement gap was going to be closed. Well, okay, so we've moved on, so now we've got every child succeeds, every student succeeds. I just love how the feds are always so optimistic. So, even though they don't put any resources in terms of supporting us. Sorry, making you laugh. Closing the gap. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here in formative assessment is here's where the kids are at the beginning of the lesson, right? You've got them to a particular point. It might be a new goal. It might be a continuation of the previous goal, like we saw with Kate Roberts. Here's where you want them to be at the end of the lesson. 1, 2, 3 class periods. If you let it go out any longer than that, you've really lost track of where they are. So what do you have in between? Okay, a gap. And the goal is to get all kids, as far as humanly possible, to meet the learning goal. And the idea of formative assessment is you're using that during the teaching and learning, so you're closing that gap because you're keeping tabs on where kids are, you're intervening, you're adjusting, you're recalibrating, you're changing your plans to make sure that they're moving forward. So that's what we mean by the gap in formative assessment. The other thing I hear people say a lot, even people who've done my courses, and I could absolutely scream at them, they talk about gaps in learning. We find out where the gaps are. Now, formative assessment might help you find out where the gaps are, but the gaps in knowledge, the gaps in previous learning, I prefer to think of the holes. You know, kids have got holes in math or in reading or writing. There's certain things that they haven't learnt that they still need to learn or are preventing them from really moving forward because they've not really got the foundational piece that they need here. So that can be revealed as well, but the idea of the gap, and this is the whole literature on formative assessment, it is a feedback loop that's operational in the classroom in the way that you saw it with Kate Roberts. Okay, so that's when you hear the gap in formative assessment, that's what it means. It's not the achievement gap. Unfortunately, we still have a pretty large achievement gap, particularly for English learners. Very, very stubborn, persistent achievement gap. So here we have the feedback loop. Ta-da! So we've got where am I going? This is the red zone where we're going to focus today. Where am I now? Evidence. And then where to next? What do I do? And you can see the goal is to close the gap. So this is the operational feedback loop that works in the classroom. Now, I don't have time to talk about building blocks, but basically the building blocks are, when you're thinking about learning goals, it's what are those incremental steps from one standard to the next standard? What changes in kids' thinking? It's very similar. Yeah, this is just a fancier version. Okay. Or a more, yeah, that's it, the feedback loop. And what I did in this book, so long ago since I wrote it, I've written about 4 books since then. I Actually, I've written 2 this year. How about that? 2 books in a year. Can you stand it? No wonder my hair looks a wreck. So each chapter, like I'm doing now with you, each chapter takes a chunk. So what would be good is, you know, after each session, if you just read the chapter that's focused on the learning goals, because we got the process, and I've called it the feedback loop there. This is on page 11. And then I have the earlier, I have the graphic somewhere of that.
Page 22.
Of the other one.
Yeah, page 22.
Yeah, and then if you look on page 27, you can see I've got the assessment in terms of the grain size, just a different way of thinking about the grain size. And here we're at this very fine sand at the bottom. But yeah, this is the feedback loop, and as I'm doing with you now, oh yeah, you can see on this page, although I have a much better graphic now, I like this one much better. 22, it's got the assessment system. You know, we play around with the graphics, but yeah, so thanks for pointing that out. I'd even forgotten about that. So looking here then, and you can follow along with the more detailed one on page 11 if you want. But I've introduced this idea of building blocks. I don't think I had it in, this book was in 2010, published in 2010. But the idea is you have to think about, okay, here's the end of one standard, there's the next standard. What are those incremental shifts in kids' thinking or in their skill level that's going to get them to meet the next grade level standards? And it's a way of helping think about the learning goals. And we'll be practicing learning goals this afternoon. So don't you dare disappear after lunch, because I'll think you don't want to do learning goals. So determining the learning goals and then those success criteria. And what are the success criteria again? Yeah, to know if they've met the goal, right? Don't say it so surprised. Yeah, absolutely. So we need them, and eventually closing that gap. So where am I going? I know what my students are learning. I know why they showed up today. I know why I got out of bed, right? I know what they're learning. And then the second thing is, I know how I'll know if they've learned it. It's the same with any assessment. You know, the end of course, the interim benchmark, all the ones you've talked about, all have goals. That they're assessing these goals, and then there are performance criteria for actually meeting those goals. So formative assessment is no different, it's just operating at the micro level. And then, the same for the students. I know what I'm supposed to be learning. I can't stress enough how critical it is, and it's really worth spending the time. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of teachers have taken up this idea and they just shove the standard on the board. This is what you're learning. Or they'll tell kids, here's the objective today. That's not what we're doing here. We have to help them understand what meeting that goal entails. For example, with the mentor text that you saw. And I'm going to need some help from my math and science social studies colleagues about how you help kids understand the math goal. What am I supposed to be learning? And then how will I know? Because going back to Javier's point, you can't make those adjustments, evidence-based adjustments, if you don't know that you're not learning it. Okay, so this is the red zone. And as you can see, it drives the whole process of formative assessment. Then in the blue zone, where am I now? That's eliciting the evidence. So I've got to find ways in my lesson of getting evidence of student learning. And it may be that I don't assess all kids every day. And that's okay. There may be some kids that you're really worried about, that you're on top of them day in, day out. And I don't mean that, I mean nicely, that you really want to understand where they are. There's other kids, and this goes back to knowing your students. And there's other students who are moving along, you're checking in with them, but it's not such an intensive daily input. Or it may be that you do the whole class. you know, whiteboards, clickers, technology response things. But your way of getting evidence, and notice here, you interpret that evidence. Okay, what does this evidence I have, and oftentimes you're doing it in the moment, what does this tell me in relation to my success criteria? If I hear this explanation the kid's just given me, does it meet the criteria that I've established? Is it the kind of explanation? And that's where you need to focus with those kids who are all those apps. Give me an explanation of why this, you know, give me your proof. And you identify the gap. Has learning moved forward? And so what do I do to adjust what I'm doing to make sure that it's a continuous process of getting towards the learning goal? What happens when one gap closes?
Open another gap.
Yeah. And remember, it's the just right gap, the Goldilocks, right? Because what happens if it's over here?
You're creating more gaps.
Yeah, you sure are. That's a really good way of saying it. You're creating more gaps, plus you're way outside that comfort, the learning zone. And what if it's here? Yeah. Hey, miss, why did I come to school today? I'm checking out, I'm bored stiff. Okay. And then the teacher is intentionally obtaining evidence of learning. And that's not thumbs up, thumbs down. I mean, okay, if you want to do thumbs up, thumbs down, but please don't assume that's giving you qualitative insights into student thinking, which is what we're going for here. So I've looked at my lesson. I know where there's formative opportunities. I know how I can augment them by engaging in discussion, engaging interaction, having questions, asking kids questions. But I've thought about that ahead of time. And I have to tell you, every single teacher, bar none, that I've worked with on 2 continents, after they've really focused on formative assessment, says one thing about their teaching. It is so much more intentional. And that works well for me. And then where do I go next? So I have this, I know where this child is, I know where this group is, I know where my class is. What am I going to do next? And we'll go into more detail about this next time. But I really have appropriated the New Zealanders' ideas of deliberate acts of teaching. Am I modeling? Am I explaining? Am I prompting? What am I doing to support the student from the edge of where they are to where they can go next? So that, ta-da, I'm taking action to close the gap. And here, in terms of getting evidence, the student is doing that. They're engaging in self-assessment, like we saw in the video, because they have the success criteria. And then they can give peer feedback because they have the success criteria. And in our 3rd session, we're going to talk a lot about how to teach these skills. These need to be taught and monitored and nurtured and massaged, because kids don't come into this world self-assessing and doing peer feedback. So that's something that the good news is that they can be taught. And then where to next? So I take this action. If I'm a student, I'm moving my own learning forward. I'm using feedback, I'm using my self-assessment, I'm noticing what's going on in the lesson so I can make those evidence-based adjustments. Okay, so there we have the feedback loop. Questions, thoughts, comments. You see how it all... And that's the continuous. That's what you saw Kate Roberts doing. She started with giving them feedback. Here's where I am. She had the goal. She got the evidence. They're moving their own learning forward through self-assessment. And so it goes on. It's part of, it's really a conception of teaching and learning. Questions, comments. Here's how I see it. And to me, reteach is doing it over. Now, that's maybe not what you mean, but there is a pretty well-known paper called Moving Beyond Got It, Didn't Get It. And what I hear teachers, so you're going to have to, can you stand me on my little podium, my hobby horse, for a minute or two? So I hear all the time, well, I check for understanding. Actually, that's not what you're doing. I don't want you checking for understanding. I want you getting insights into their current thinking. It's not about do they understand or don't they understand. It's about where are they in their thinking right now, or where's their skills right now. Where are they after this period of instruction? You know, because I'm going to, whether it's an investigation in science, whether it's exploration, whether they've done some math problem solving, whether I've given a mini lesson, where are they? You know, what's happened inside their brains? So I get these insights about how are they thinking about this, and then what I need to do from the edge of that learning. Just keep the edge in mind. So when you said, I actually thought you said edge to start with, but the engagement, it's re-engage them from the point at where they are. So you may decide that, you know, and we'll go into it in more detail next time, but you may decide, okay, I can give this kid a prompt to just prompt them to make a connection that's going to get them to the next point. Or I may need to stand back and explain something. Or I may need to model something, but I have to do something. But what I'm doing is not reteaching, I'm actually calibrating my response pedagogically to that edge of where the student is. And that's the art, probably the science as well, figuring out. Now, is this an exact science? No. If you get it wrong one day, fine, you can fix it the next. This isn't high stakes assessment, but it's, did you say it was like being an athlete? Yeah, it is like being an athlete. Teaching is a very, I mean, I don't need to tell you, teaching is a very complex activity because you're orchestrating all these decisions in the course of a lesson. You're making all these judgments in the course. That's why I think teaching's so tiring. I'm telling you right now, I could not be a classroom teacher right now. Even when I walk into a school, I'm exhausted. I swear to God, I am. Because it's so complex. These little human things have got so much energy. And it's about figuring out where they are and matching, and it's complex judgments. And you're recalibrating, you're making these decisions. Just think about the number of decisions that you make in the course of a lesson. It's huge. Yeah, you've got to find different ways of reaching kids. And I'm sure you've all, I mean, I can still remember kids I taught gazillions of years ago in the UK. I mean, you know, the 4 o'clock syndrome. How am I going to get Ronnie Brown to do this? I've tried this, and I've tried this, and I've tried this. What do I do tomorrow? And that's, you know, because I knew he was stuck. And my job was to unstick him, and I was having a really hard time doing it. That's when other colleagues, of course, are helpful. But that's why the got it, didn't get it, reteach. That's old paradigm. That's old thinking about learning and assessment. New thinking, well, actually, contemporary cognitive science has been around for a long time. But it's about how you help kids build structures within their brains, for want of a better analogy, and how you do it through interaction and engagement with others, with tools, with materials, but most of all by engaging with you and with their peers. I mean, that's what, you know, those are the theories that are driving contemporary education, not the behaviorist, you know. I mean, behaviorist theory is really about stimulus and response, and that's good if you want kids to learn multiplication tables or, you know, rote learning. But right now, rote learning was part of what went on in the Industrial Revolution. We're in the technological revolution, and we're still teaching as though it was in the industrial age. Come on, guys. You're not, but, you know. That's why we're stuck where we are. 27th in math on the PISA. Do you know Vietnam's number 14 in math? You know what the PISAs are, the international assessments, the international tests that the OECD countries, the developed countries of the world take.
What did you say is 14?
Vietnam.
Oh.
You want to know where the US is?
You said 26th or something?
It might even be 27.
27.
Who's number 1?
Shanghai, China. But Shanghai, not the whole of China. But you know what? I've had a number of colleagues go to China recently, and they want creative thinking. They realize that rote isn't going to, you know, they've got these pockets of absolute stunning excellence, but, you know, getting the cognitive revolution going. And that's why it's just worth spending a moment on theory, because most of the theory that drives what happens in classrooms isn't contemporary learning theory. It's learning theory from a past era. So we're talking about helping kids construct their own meaning, to make their own meaning. And this doesn't mean just letting them go off and do their own thing, but we've got to be actively involved, assisting them every point to build their thinking or to develop their skills. And really should be both. Now you've all gone very quiet, like you're thinking, I don't know if I like what you said. Let me into your thinking. What are you thinking? You know, I took some people around the lab school. This teacher I was going to show on Skid Row, she's now at the lab school, and her classroom is just beyond incredible. And so I had some people from Arizona I was taking around, and she was a district person, and she said to one child, she said, "So do you think that's the right answer?" And the child looked at her and said, "My teacher doesn't care about the right answer. What she cares about is my strategy and how well I can explain it." Second grade. I mean, boy, this woman came to that, I can't believe what I've just heard. This is so amazing. You know? I mean, this is the new era. We've got to get our heads in a different place. We're teaching them for their future, not our past. That's what I used to say to parents, their future. Show your work, explain it. How did you get there? How might you apply? If we're going for transfer, which is the key goal, can you transfer what you've learned to novel situations? And that's what I'm talking about, these atomistic, discrete skills. They don't transfer. So you end up with this great swathe of the population that can't do math because they've learnt in these atomistic ways and they haven't understood the conceptual foundations. And the standards are about conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, and they go together. You know, it's not that we're focused on procedural fluency, but in the end, yeah, there's an efficient way to do things, procedural fluency, but don't get there without some grounding. Other thoughts? Because I don't really want to get into anything new now before lunch, I don't think. I think we can learn a lot from other countries, but, you know, this is the US culture, the way the US does business and so on. But that's not to say we can't learn from other countries. For sure we can. Especially those that are way ahead of us. No, you've got to figure out where they are, why they've bombed it, and fix it. Yeah, if you just keep moving on and they haven't understood this, then no, and you're not building the house on bedrock. You're building it on sand. And what happens eventually, they fall through into the sand pit and they don't get out. So no moving on. And the other thing is, and I'm just going to end on this, because I think a lot of our kids are underachieving.
Yes.
I really do. And I think we're so busy waiting for other kids to catch up that we don't move kids on. And so, you know, you've also, well, I've got a big span in my classroom. Well, actually, your span should, if you're doing a great job, your span should be getting bigger. Because kids need to be moving on, you know, and that's the job of the teaching. That's where you get to every kid. It's each one. And people have argued that really what we should be looking at, I mean, I know it's not popular out there, but there should be there should be that difference. People don't learn in lockstep. They don't learn at the same pace in the same way. And so formative assessment is one way of accommodating to that. But then it goes back to your content knowledge. Do you have enough content knowledge to know what needs to come next for kids? And what they need before, so you can fix if they're bombing a test. You need to find out why. That's when you have to do an analysis. Well, why are they bombing this test? Because then I've got to not reteach it. I've got to fix whatever's not been understood. Well, you know what? That's because they don't understand anything about human development. Just let them know. I told them. Yeah. Okay? And as you say, kids will only get so far. And that's why, algebra is such a gatekeeper, because you get so far, but then, they haven't got some of the core basic understandings that they need to move into Algebra 1. So, that's a huge problem, as you well know, right across the country. So I think your point's really well taken. I like that you've got to have something to hang these skills on. Let's get started. We can catch our colleagues up when they arrive. I just wondered if the subject matter folks had any comments that they wanted to make. I know you said something about, math, which was very helpful based on what we've been talking about this morning. I think content knowledge is really, really important for formative assessment. And not just knowing how to do math or knowing how to write, but understanding how students learn to do it. And I see that as more and more an obstacle in the work that they don't know. And it's not just elementary school teachers, there's a lot of high school teachers don't have that. If you go back to Kate Roberts, she's clear what the development of that type of essay looks like and what the steps are along the way. So this idea of progression, I think, is really, really important, and probably something we don't really pay enough attention to, but it is the content knowledge. And I'm sure you find that, people say, well, high school teachers have content knowledge. Well, yeah, they do, but it's about how kids learn. It's the knowledge of the discipline in terms of how kids come to know and understand important concepts and practices. Yeah, how are we going to get there, and how will I know along the way? Yeah, for some teachers, it's a real 180 in teaching. It really is. Okay, so I don't know what's happened to our colleagues here. Maybe they've had to go out for lunch. I don't know. Do you know? Well, anyway, you're here and they're not, so let's get going. So what we're going to do this afternoon is really now focus in on learning goals and success criteria. And I'm going to do, so we've got two important topics this afternoon. One is learning goals and success criteria, which you saw from the feedback loop is the driver of the whole thing. Being clear, what's the learning intention? People call them learning goals, learning targets, learning intentions, learning objectives. I don't care what you call them, provided they specify what kids are going to learn. And then the success criteria, how will you know? What are these performances of learning? How will you know if they're actually learning what you want them to be learning? And hopefully they want to be learning as well. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that, and I'm going to give you a chance to create some learning goals and success criteria and give each other feedback on them. And then after the break, we'll go into the classroom culture. That's where we'll finish up the classroom culture, and then, of course, I have homework assignments for you between now and next time, including reading the book. If they're kind enough to give you the book, then we should be reading the chapter on learning goals and success criteria, for sure. That's already assigned. Okay, so let's get going in here. So here we are, the red zone, the driver. A lot of people get stuck here. I found this in the UK, I find it here. And I think it's because the way teachers have been trained in the US about these behavioral objectives that we just end up with, I can identify something or I can recognize something. But it's much more that deeper learning. What are you going to apply? What are you going to analyze? What are you going to understand? And so a lot of people get stuck here. And it is important, but it's not a place. I remember I'm working with a district in Arizona, and the superintendent's telling me, you've got to get out of the red zone, because they're just stuck there. They don't feel I've got my learning goals right. So I know what my students are learning, and I'll know how they've learned it. And these are lesson-sized goals. Remember, this is the scale at which formative assessment operates, the lesson-sized goals. Okay, and the same with this comes from a colleague of mine at UCLA. And it's the same with any assessment task. You start with the learning goals, then you have an interpretive framework, whether it's a large-scale standardized assessment. What are the performances you're looking for? What tells you if they've met that performance standard, or they're above it, or they're below it. And then what are these assessment tasks that are going to be aligned to the learning goal? You're going to use the success criteria to interpret them, and the interpretive framework's aligned to the goal. So it really operates in the same way as any kind of assessment does, but it just so it's at the micro level in the classroom. So we've already said, I've touched on these, and I'm just reprising them by way of setting up for our learning goals success criteria activities. But we know that end of grade level expectations are too big for learning goals. I mean, at one time, you know, certain state standards, including some California standards, were you could do it in a lesson, 2 or 3 class periods. But now there's so much meatier, there's so much more substantive, that they're too big. They're really about what kids are going to achieve at the end of the grade level. And so formative assessment is about going back to that comprehensive system, those small grain sizes along the way that get you. So we're not talking about learning goals being the end of grade level expectations, but of course they're derived from that, because that's ultimately where you want kids to get to, or whatever performance standards you have. Even if you're not going by the Common Core, I'm sure you in every school that you have some performance expectations for the end of the year. But as we said earlier, and I'm sorry, our science guy, remind me of your name. John. That was my husband's name. You think I'd have remembered. What John said about, you know, understanding that we're not doing these skills in isolation, but they're connected to a bigger whole. And so the lesson learning goals will be part of the unit, and they come together to actually make something worth knowing and understanding that are related to the standards. So that it's really a sort of nested way of thinking about this, that the learning goals are the little day-by-day goals, but they're connected to the unit goals, larger goals, which are connected to the standard. And I think this is really important in terms of thinking about lesson learning goals, that they are connected to each other and they do amount to something in the end. Okay? Oh, here are our colleagues now. Sauntering, I might say. I'll tell them off when they get here. So learning goals. Okay. So it's what students will learn, and where teachers attempted to start with this, and I'm talking about the UK, and you know, I've worked in so many states in the United States. They talk about what kids are going to do. I remember a classic example. I said to a teacher in a state a long way from here, one of these workshops, and she was doing learning goals, and she had spinning was her learning goal, and I said, okay, so spinning, yes, it's my math goal. All right, I thought, well, I don't know any concept in math called spinning. So she said, yeah, they're going to do this, they're going to spin this, that, and the other. And then I just said to her, and why are they doing that? Oh, she said, because I want them to understand probability. And I thought, okay, you actually do have a concept, but you're so stuck in what the kids are going to do that you don't actually get beyond the activity. But the issue is, why are you doing what you're doing? So the kids know what they're learning. So it's what they'll do, what they'll learn. And in honor of my science colleagues, I say they're introduced at some point in the lesson, where it makes sense to introduce, okay, this is our goal today, and these are our criteria. And then if you've done a lot of activity beforehand, you can connect the goals and criteria to what went beforehand, or if you introduce them early on in the lesson, it's what comes next, or here's the exemplar, or here's how we're going to understand these goals. But a big deal, I'm going to show you a couple of videos this afternoon where teachers are helping students understand what the goals are. That's absolutely critical that they understand. Okay, so let me just give you an example. And I have a lot from this woman in the book, actually, Sharon. And what I say in my book is I'm not giving counsels of perfection. These are real teachers who've done real stuff, and you may think, well, I wouldn't write them like that, or those wouldn't be my criteria, but that's not the point. This is how a teacher decided to frame her learning goals in a math lesson. This was 6th grade math. And so what she wanted the kids to understand was the structure of a coordinate grid. And then if you notice here, her success criteria were that they could talk and write about plotting points on a coordinate grid using correct vocabulary. And I actually watched this lesson, and oh my goodness, it was in Syracuse City School District in New York State. Really challenging school. I mean, really. And these kids, in another teacher's hands, that had been swinging off that projector, but honestly, they were just so involved, and she had this huge grid on the floor, you know, and they'd get up and they'd walk and they'd talk about it and plot these points with their body. And so with other children giving feedback. So that was one criterion, and could the kids do that? And then the second was, and again, the verb, to relate the procedure of plotting points in quadrants to the structure of a coordinate grid. This is in the book actually, so I use this one a lot because I think it's very clear. And the success criteria for these were I can plot and label points in each quadrant on a coordinate grid, and then I can create a rule about coordinates for each quadrant. And so I actually watched her teach the first class period, and they didn't get to this in the first class period. This would be the second, but they focused on that. And so the whole lesson was structured around that. And one of the things the teacher did, and I've seen this with other really successful people in formative assessment, they kept coming back to that. Okay, let's just see where we are. Let's do a check-in. Who thinks, you know, where they are? What do we need to be doing to ensure you're all on track? Again, that, you know, the stitching of the responsibility. Who thinks they're on track? Who needs to, this person's second grade class, I actually have a video I'm going to show you to conclude the afternoon on this. I mean, the teacher has them with little plastic stands, and on the table, say, you know, you're working together and I have your goal and your success criteria, and they may be different. First thing I do when I sit down is say, so how do you think you're doing on your, you know, I'm going to have a one-on-one conference with you, I'm going to have a conversation. So how do you think you're doing? Why do you think that? So again, it's not, the focus isn't on tell me, explain to me, but it's where do you think you are? So once again, it's putting it back as it's all these little micro messages. I'm into micro messaging. I discovered this concept about 3 weeks ago from some mucky mathematician professors, and they talk about the micro messaging in the classroom. So, you know, rather than starting, well, show me your work, tell me what you're doing, well, where do you think you are with meeting these learning goals? And the kids can tell you. You know, you asked about elementary, there they are, first and second grade, they can tell you. You were going to ask a question, I believe, and I talked over it. Those are the performances of learning, and they should be aligned. And, you know, in the book that you've got, I do give a lot of different examples, and some are stronger than others. And I have reflection questions at the end, you know, which do you think are stronger, learning goals and criteria? But thanks for that question, because think of these as performances of learning. This is what you want them to walk away with. And these are the performances. Can they actually do this? Can they create a rule? And she had a very elaborate lesson, and she, I've given up showing the lesson now, because every time I've showed it in the past, people go into cardiac arrest. I think there's quite a bit of it in the, well, they do. It's in the book. I'm sorry, I'll stop trying to be funny. You're the only two that are laughing, by the way. Everyone looks so serious, and they crack up every time I open my mouth. So it's my British sense of humour. That's what you're getting here. So anyway, this is all in the book. You can see the lesson, and like I say, cardiac arrest. You really expect me to do this? Well, actually, yes, I do. But when you get good at this, when it becomes part of your mindset and how you think about these things, then you don't have to write everything down. And when people, and I'll talk about this more next time, but then people say, I can't do this for every lesson. Okay, then choose one lesson. in the next 2 weeks or the next month, what is one lesson? What is one must-have? And then apply formative assessment to that lesson. And then as you start applying it, you just get to the point, well, you know, I can't think in any other way. So learning goals, and so this is Sharon's, and then this is another one. This is Glory's. Understand that the characters and the narrator have unique language styles. I think this was 7th grade. So the success criterion, and remember I gave you some of descriptions, describe the narrators and different characters' language styles. So first of all, can you describe the styles? And that's a little different from identify. Oh, this is the narrator, this is the... But can you describe them? Can you share with me your thinking about how you know the difference between the two? And then the second criterion was explain why the narrators and characters' language styles are different from one another. So if I'm setting out with this reading, then I have a mindset, this is what I'm supposed to be focusing on, the narrators and the characters' language styles. So I'm into that straight away, I know what I'm looking at. And the teacher can come to me and say, so, or even stop the whole class, so, oh, what does one teacher call it? Oh my goodness. I have to find out what she calls it. It's so brilliant. She stops, you know, 2 or 3 times during the lesson. She doesn't call them calibration points, but it's something like that, where they all have a moment. Like, is there anything we need to be stopping and thinking about? Is there...
Just call them your aha moments.
Yeah, your aha moments. But yeah, but it's more than that. It's not an aha. It's sort of... in your thinking, has there something bubbled up that we need to hear about or we need to talk about because it's not clear? And she does it 2 or 3 times in the lesson. This is 1st and 2nd grade, and they always have something. So again, I'm not offering these as counsels of perfection, but you can see where these teachers are going. This is what I want them to understand. And then here's how I'll know, and they'll know if they've understood it. Does that help? Is that clear? So now let's think about what makes a good learning goal. And so, and then I'm going to ask you to review some learning goals, and then I'm going to ask you to create some. And this is where our subject matter folks will come into focus, I hope. All right. Clear and linked to the big picture of learning. All right? Clear and linked to the big picture of learning. So what's the purpose and what's the context? A couple of years ago, it's probably not interested in this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. A couple of years ago, oh, maybe longer than that, 4 years ago, I did, the state of Nevada asked me to do their teacher evaluation standards. And I said, I'll do them. I don't know what you do in your school, but out there in the field, especially when it's not quite as, and it's not been as dominant in California. But you know, they'd have something like 91 indicators that they were supposed to be assessed on. And I said, this is ridiculous. I said, yeah, I'll help you, but we're having no more than 5 standards. So they all gulped. 5 standards, 18 indicators. That is manageable. So what's high leverage? And this was, one of the standards, of course, was to do with formative assessment. But this was threaded through all the standards. Is it clear? Is it linked to the big picture of learning? Can kids tell you what they're learning, why they're learning it, and how they'll know if they've learned it? And they're still in the Nevada standards for teachers, the explicit indicators. And remember going back to the circles, the little goal, the unit goal, the standards, they're all that connectivity. Focused on the learning. What am I going to learn? What will I understand? What will I know? What will I be able to do as a result of this lesson? Now this is important because, as I said, you are going to be sharing them. You're going to be helping the kids understand. And for those of you who think, and I haven't heard that, maybe it's just the public schools teachers, but they say, well, I don't have time to do this. Well, you know what? You need to make time. And it's, again, going slow to go fast, because if kids understand what it is they're supposed to be learning, then they can be much more invested and involved. And I'm also here to tell you that a number of teachers have told me it's increased kids' motivation. So we'll get into that when we do the learning goals. And then realistic and time limited. You know, formative assessment happens at the lesson level, so it's got to be realistic. Is this manageable in 1 to 3, 4 class periods? And then, although we're not going to talk about that today, but then does this connect to what came before and what came after? What's coming after? And this is the key. Because atomistic, discrete bits and pieces of learning are out. We need to have productive learning experiences that are going to lead to deep understanding and competence in these analytic principles of the domain. Analyzing, justifying, explaining, evaluating. Each discipline has these analytic practices. Okay, so what I want you to do now, on handout 2, you have some learning goals. So I'm going to keep these, and you have these criteria about what makes a good learning goal. So what I'd like you to do now is to go through these learning goals and identify which are strong and which are weak and which are even medium. So you can do, I'm going to encourage you to discuss it, and then we'll think about why they're strong and why they're weak goals. You know, however we want to say what it is, in my view, this is going to lead to some rich, productive, deep learning experiences. I mean, this is going to be hard. You know, I don't know how many of you have ever read Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but it's a really tough play. And it's not as though Hamlet's a walk in the park either. You know, so when you're trying to draw from them in this analytic perspective, that's challenging, and it should be. I mean, this is high school. It should be challenging. So yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And sometimes you're pulling several elements from several standards together in one goal. But again, you know your kids. The point is, we're not doing this Mickey Mouse, discrete bits and pieces anymore. These are substantive. And somebody said was it you said the weak use science equipment to, I mean, so, you know, you like following a recipe, so what? I mean, I've come to school to use science equipment and kitchen compounds for our experiments. I don't think so. Well, you have to think, I mean, I can just think of I can just think of so many kids that would take one look at that and just completely check out. Or start throwing the compounds around, you know? I mean, seriously. Did anybody have any others they thought were weak?
Creating a cartoon, I thought that was very weak.
Yeah. So? Yeah. I mean, exactly. Paint a landscape. Yeah. So. But, you know, some of these are really the kind of stuff that gets said and put up there in classrooms. I'm sorry to have to tell you, but it's true. So now you are going to take your learning in this, and with the blue sheet, everybody got their blue sheet, and you don't have to do this. I'm channeling Kate Roberts, that teacher. If you have a lesson that you're thinking about tomorrow or next week, you want to do your own learning goals for that lesson and the success criteria, then that's up to you. Okay? But if you don't, then you can use one of these scenarios. And these are all actual scenarios. So you either choose a scenario from here, or you think of an upcoming lesson that you're going to teach next week or whenever, and do your own. But the idea is that, and I'm going to give you, let's say I'll check in with you in 20 minutes. No, 25 minutes. Let me check in with you in 25 minutes, see where you are. I mean, I'll be coming around. But at the end of the 25 minutes, I'd like you to have written on poster paper, which is over here. I'll tear it off and bring them round for you. Your learning goal and success criteria, either for one of these scenarios or a lesson. Maybe a lesson you're going to teach tomorrow. or whenever. It's up to you. So one of these or your own lesson. But using these criteria, I'd like you to write a learning goal and success criteria that's appropriate for your age group, okay? And for who your kids are. And remember, there's no right or wrong here. I mean, we know some will be stronger than others, some are weaker than others. And some of these are just plain horrible. But you won't do the plain horrible, I know. If you do, I'll be sticking with Shakespeare. Good for you. Do you teach Shakespeare?
She does.
Yeah, okay.
I just love Shakespeare myself.
Well, I lived in Stratford-on-Avon.
Wow.
I know. That was where I went. I've seen all the plays, all the theatre. I was an English major. You name it, I've done it. So, all right, you set. So at about 5 till 2, you've got this time to work, and then I'm going to see if anybody's brave enough to share so we can provide some feedback. Okay? So I'll come around with the big posters, and your job is the learning goals and success criteria. Let me just take this as an example. If I can just do a think aloud for you. So they had used reading strategies to comprehend text while reading aloud. So to me, the kids are going to be reading aloud, but the key is the relationship between the strategies and the comprehension. And so in discussion, we talked about, and you have it here. So we want them to, I don't think they need to discuss, but they need to explain which strategy they chose, which strategy they used, at what points in the text, and how it helped you understand the text. Because that's what you're going for. How did this help you understand the text? And immediately you do that, then you've notched up this, and you've actually got them into the focusing to doing some metacognitive work as to how did this strategy help me understand the text. And then in a conversation with a kid, it would be, in a similar situation, would you use that same strategy again? Or do you think another one might have been better? So you're really beginning to have the kids internalize that strategy and know that it's about comprehension. Okay, because that's where I thought we had a good conversation about that. I hope you did too, but it was really, okay, if you're going for comprehension, how is the child going to know this strategy help them comprehend? Because that's what your goal is, to comprehend text. So we need to find out if that metacognitive work's going on that the child can think. No, what we're after is how the strategy helped them comprehend the text. That's what we want the kids to be able to articulate. Okay, so when I was reading this out of my repertoire of strategies, I decided to go ahead and reread. I read forwards, then I read backwards. So, okay, so how did that help you? Because just because it's a strategy they've learnt in class doesn't mean to say they have any clue about applying it and how it can help. Now, you could write a different goal about drawing inferences, which would be a different level of comprehension, but it could be evaluative comprehension, it could be literal, it could be inferential, depends, but it doesn't say that in the goal. But I think the learning goal is fine as is. It's using strategies to comprehend. And that's basically why we help kids have strategies. It's like with math strategies to help them solve problems. What are these different approaches that help you? But why does it help you? Why is this better than this? Why did you choose this? And you can end up with all kinds of lessons and rich discussions about that. But there may be other ways in which they're comprehending. It might not be particularly reading strategies. It might be, okay, I'm going to do a summary. But the reading strategies will help them to get the summary. But I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with the goal. I don't think we should try and rewrite the goal, because this seems a legitimate goal for young children. But what I like about this is that they're getting a sense of this is where the metacognition is to comprehend text. No, it's not saying using reading strategies while reading aloud. It's actually to comprehend the text. And I think that, to me, that takes it to a different level for a kid. I'm using textual evidence to draw out the language that describes the animal imagery. And, I sort of challenged Jennifer, and she said, well, this is what I want them to do. And I thought, well, that's not unreasonable. But I kept thinking, well, why? Why are they doing that? And they're studying Othello. And the question is, the bigger goal here is, why does Shakespeare use animal imagery in Othello? And if you know the play, there's a whole host of reasons why he uses animal imagery. And so this gets me the higher order question, which in the end we put down as an essential question. And this might be a lesson on the way to this. But all the time I'm looking for, is the learning substantive? And I would like to say that what I was able to do is to push you to a different level of really getting to much higher levels of learning, much more rigor. We did that in this instance over here with metaphors and similes, and ended up not just identifying metaphors and similes, but explaining or discussing or describing why the author chose to use those particular methods. You know, what was the author's purpose, what effect did it have? And that was what, 2nd grade, 5th. So, you know, you get to a much higher level once you start. And of course, with language arts, it gets harder because of the text gets harder. But, you know, you could have done the same goal with younger children, but obviously using a different text. So I think you actually did a good job. I often do this with people, and I'm not tearing my hair out. I've only told one person to cross something out, which is highly unusual. I haven't screamed at anybody, so I think we've done a good job, right? I think you can be very pleased. And this was a good one because I'm not a science person, but this was focused on observation and recording. So the goal was focused on the doing and not on, well, why am I observing? Why am I recording? And in the end, I understood why I was doing that. But that went to a higher goal as well, didn't it? The bigger goal, and that was part of the lesson towards that bigger goal. So why am I doing that? Because kids need to be able to answer that question. Why are you having me do this? Okay. Well, surprise, surprise, this is going to be your homework between now and next time. But I'll say more about that towards the end. So this didn't go as planned, as things never do. But I was going to talk about, we give some feedback, and I'll be talking a lot more about feedback next time. A lot more about feedback. So here, you did the success criteria without me going over these, but they really are these performances of learning. And there's an Australian scholar called Patrick Griffin, and he talks about what kids say, do, make, or write. Remember, if we're trying to get those substantive insights into their thinking, what are they saying, what are they doing, what are they making, what are they writing? And if you look at your success criteria now, they're all about what are they saying, what are they doing, what are they making, what are they writing. Aligned to the learning goals, and I know I had a question here, we had suffixes and affixes, and I thought, what the heck's got to do with describing animal imagery? But they were able to explain it to me, so I got it. And clearly understood by students. And only you know your students and what they will understand. Okay? This is the basis of instruction. It's the basis of formative assessment. If you don't have these, I don't know how you are able to assess kids, let alone instruct them. Does this make sense? Does it feel challenging? Does it feel like, yeah, this is too much like hard work? It does. Okay, so quick once over for that. And then you've done that, and we've given feedback. And we've talked about what you learned. Okay, we know where learning goals and success criteria fit in the feedback loop. We know they drive the whole process. You have developed some skills in writing them and communicating them. Well, writing them, at least for that point of communication, and I think you learned a lot. And I have to say, having done this with so many people over the years, you are definitely one of the better groups. I'm not just saying that, it's true. I am, it's true, you are. Sometimes they drive me to distraction. But anyway, are you really a teacher? No, I never say that. I might think it, but I never say it. All right, so just sticking these up here isn't going to help kids know what meeting them entails. All right, so you've got the goals, the criteria, or you maybe co-construct them. I think as kids get older, they can co-construct, as Kate Roberts did with her from the mentor text. That's up to you. I wouldn't try that tomorrow because I think they need to understand more about goals and criteria. But then how do we communicate them? How do we help kids internalize them? Not just read them up like today we're going to do this, but how do we help our students internalize them? So I'm going to show you a couple of videos. One is a high school. Actually, I realize they're both in, I will show some other subjects next time. I do have a math one to finish with though. My focus for you is how does this teacher help his students understand success criteria? So he's not walked into a lesson and said, here's the goal, here's the success criteria, now get on with it. This is actually a high school in Toronto. You're making me laugh at myself now, Jennifer, stop. This is a high school in Toronto where the Canadians have been at this game a bit longer than we have. So this is your question, and then I'm going to show you an elementary age student.
Samples and exemplars help students to represent and define the learning, develop and apply the criteria, assess and monitor progress, conceptualize and analyze assessment tasks.
So you've been divided up into groups of 3 students, and each group has an exemplary graphic text. So what I would like you to do today is browse through the graphic text and identify the essential elements of a graphic text and the essential elements of an allegory. Then we're going to brainstorm those, put them up on the board, and develop a list of success criteria that we can use when we're writing our own graphic text and allegories. Take several minutes to look through the graphic text in your groups. You have your brainstorming sheet. Fill out the brainstorming sheet on success criteria, and then we need at least 1 point from every student in the classroom or from every group up on the board.
Words are supported by the pictures and vice versa.
Especially in terms of characterization, because sometimes when drawing it, it's going to be really important to just like train the character through the visual.
You don't need to describe it as much as you would in the text, so instead it's very sparse in terms of words, but the pictures take care of the rest of the explanation.
Engineering effective learning conversations encourages students and teachers to interact with and internalize the goals and criteria.
So have you guys come up with any essential elements for allegories or graphic texts from looking at this exemplar?
So just using like the deeper meaning to get the implicit.
What do you mean by explicit?
In this graphic text, we really noticed that the use of mice as characters really furthered the message.
Reach the goal through critical thinking and self-reflection.
What are some of the deeper levels of meaning that you've gleaned from the text?
It's talking about the philosophy that you live your life with, and that's the implicit meaning in that text.
Okay. So that's something you guys need to focus on when you're writing your allegory. A superficial, surface level meaning that everyone can understand, and then deeper levels of implicit meaning within the allegory.
Cultivate common understandings of goals and outcomes.
I just want to make sure that you guys are clear about the difference between an explicit and an implicit meaning.
Explicit is the surface level of the story. For instance, the tortoise and the hare.
Okay.
If one was to look at it with the explicit meaning in mind, it would simply be about a tortoise and a hare who had grace. But the implicit meaning is always keeping, putting effort in, or else others who are more hungry than you in terms of ambition will overtake you.
Become learning resources for one another.
Do you think that imagery and symbolism are essential to allegory?
I think so.
Why? They need symbolism if they're going to have any implicit meaning or sort of like a subtext.
Whenever these characters find themselves at the mountain, for example, that I think there's an implicit message there that the mountain, for example, provides knowledge. I think that's what they're trying to imply here.
Okay. So do you think that would be one of the elements of success criteria that we would be looking for?
Well, I noticed that most of the story is split between shots of, for example, the narrative. For example, here where there's simply dialogue, but then they also have certain shots involving the mountain and the fountain, which to me seems to suggest that there's something more to those elements than simply the literal meanings as a mountain.
One person from each group, could you please come up? The chalk is up there. Just put 1 point that we could use to construct our list of success criteria.
Okay, so just as a group, in the interest of time, what kind of things was he doing to help them internalize those criteria? They're looking for them themselves.
Yeah, they're looking for the criteria themselves.
And he's deepening their thinking with the questioning. And also, if you notice, he does do some summarizing for them. So when you're doing this, I want you to be sure that. So he pulls out one of the core ideas. So when you come to doing this, I think with implicit, explicit meaning, I want you to be sure that you do this. So he's really bringing it to a summary point. And then there'll be a discussion with the class. I mean, you know, is this, do people agree with it? So again, you're just deepening that learning before they even start. So people will say, well, I've got this to cover, but look how much they've learned through doing this. And they've done the work, folks.
What empowerment for them.
Exactly, yeah. We go back to responsibility. If you know it's your responsibility to come up with the success criteria and you're given the structures to do it. One of my mentors a long time ago, listen carefully because there's one vowel difference. Structure and stricture. Most classrooms are strictured. That classroom is structured. And we'll talk more about that. Well, stricture means if you have structures in place, you have routines, you have expectations, you have kids knowing how to interact with each other, kids knowing that when they're supposed to do group problem solving, they do that. Because the structures are in place, the teachers actually put the task so that they can collaborate, and then they have the expectations of what it means to do that. Whereas stricture, I mean a straitjacket. I tell you what you want to do, you do it. I mean, so many classrooms, folks, yours might not be, but I'm telling you, so many classrooms that I go into, it's the stricture. Because, you know, limits give freedom, so you have to have the structure so kids can do their thinking. It's not about imposing your thinking on the student, it's helping them build their own thinking with the structures you put in place through the tasks, through the language you use, through the interactions you have, through the expectations. That's what I mean by structure. Whereas stricture is, you know, I'm terrified of letting go, and that's a legitimate concern. You know, I've been a teacher with difficult kids. I know what it's like to be frightened that, you know, if you just loosen the reins for 10 seconds, they're going to be all over the place. But what I've learned over the years, if you loosen the reins within the parameters, kids like parameters, and they like routines. And once you provide that kind of structure, they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they'll operate within it.
That's part of the culture of the classroom.
Exactly, exactly. That's part of the culture of the classroom. So let's move now, and I promise I will, it's just my examples. So let's move now to a second grade class. This is a high poverty school in close to Tucson, about 30 miles from the Mexican border. And the majority of kids, a lot of kids in this class are ELs. So see how this teacher helps her students understand. They're focusing on the overarching goal of fluency in reading.
Today we're going to be focusing on a standard that we have been working on all year, right? So we are going to be working on this learning goal. So let's all read it together. Ready? I am learning how to read with fluency. Okay, so I want you to think about when you're reading with fluency, what is it that you need to be doing to be successful, to be a fluent reader? what should you be doing? So think in your head, all of you think, and you can put hands down. All of you think, what is the criteria to be a fluent reader? Okay. All right, so we're going to do a pair share, but think, you just did your thinking, so now it's the pair share. So with your shoulder buddy, I want you to share with them what are the parts of fluency. To be a fluent reader, what should you be doing?
You read smoothly, you read expression, you read fluently, and you read at just right speed. And then you would be reading his expression by reading with. When the person, when the what do you call it? The character is speaking, that means
Thank you.
You have to read with the expression when the character is speaking. You mean you would have to sound like the character when they are speaking? Yes.
So let's kind of go through and see. To be a fluent reader, you must be able to read smoothly. Well, to read smoothly, what would you be doing? How do you know you are reading smoothly? Okay, Chelsea?
Read words accurately.
You read words accurately. So the words would be read. It's another way we could say.
Automatic.
If they're accurate, they are
Automatic. Automatic.
Well, if they're accurate, that means they would be correct. Automatic is another part of reading. What is it? Smoothly. Okay, so reading automatically is another. Okay, and do we have some ideas to add on to that?
Mine is not to add on, but it's something. When you read with fluency, you gotta read with feeling.
You do need to read with feeling, which is part of reading with expression. Good job. And so when we're reading, how will we know we need to express those words that are in the text? Yes?
And there is like a punctuation mark or a question mark. You want to, your voice will have to change.
Okay, so you need to really look at the punctuation marks because they will tell you, they'll give you clues on changing your voice. Right, so if you see a question mark, what happens to your voice?
Your voice
will rise up where? A little higher at what part of the sentence? At the end of the sentence, good. If you see an exclamation mark, what do you need to do?
Show expression.
Show expression, so what do you have to think about? How will you know what expression to show? Okay. See, Hemina?
How the character is feeling.
You need to really think about how is this character feeling? How would the character respond to what's happening? Okay. And then we also need to, how will you know you're reading with meaning? How will you know you're reading with meaning? Angel?
You have to understand the words as you are reading them.
Right, you have to understand those words.
If you're reading too fast, you might want to slow down a little bit.
And why would you want to slow down a little bit?
Because you might skip the periods.
So you might skip periods, and if you skip periods, what happens?
No, saying the sentence doesn't really make sense. You stop at any place.
Right, you didn't stop. So the periods will give you a reminder to stop and do.
She asked a lot of those questions that notched up their thinking. And they were doing a really good job. I mean, you know, I'd love most second graders to be able to explain to me that that's what reading fluently means. And when we get to the third session of this, I'll be showing you some of the peer feedback that they were giving each other based on those criteria, which is really quite stunning. And so moving forward in her lesson, she had them think about the criteria and then identify a goal for themselves. What did they feel they needed to work on based on the criteria? Once again, what do I think I need to work on? And then when they were in the peer feedback groups, pairs, one student would say to the other, I would like feedback on meaning or using punctuation or whatever. And then actually what she did before they even went to their peer groups, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself now, but I think it's good to see the arc of the lesson. She spent time, she read something aloud and she made errors along the way, and they gave her feedback, what she needed to work on. And she has this little thing, a star and a step. So what's your star, what have you done well, and what's your step? And that's what they talk to each other about, which you'll see. This is your star and this is your step. And so, you know, that really set up a lot of productive learning in the classroom. No, I don't recommend it at all.
That was too much information.
Way too much. Way too much. Way too much information.
Okay.
I completely agree with you. That's their district. In fact, I think I might have given their district feedback on that because they got in the idea. I mean, it's a very dynamic district. And with the new superintendent, really, really low performing, but it's coming up and up and up. But, you know, they got this idea of these anchor charts, but I agree with you. I'm just driven demented by that.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Okay.
I mean, the kids seem to cope. They know where to go for what, but that's my thing. I mean, too much information. Yeah. But they do use those charts as resources. I saw them in there. I was in there for a whole lesson. And she's really worked this year. She took this year-long course that I talked about, and she's really worked this year on building the student role in assessment, as you can see. So your job now is to go back to your learning goals and your success criteria and think about how you would help your students internalize those criteria so that they would be able to advance in the lesson with a clear understanding of what meeting that goal entailed and what their job was. Because this is the next big thing. And it opens a whole lot of doors for metacognition, for more engaged learning, for more motivation, for deeper learning. So how do you think about your goals? And I'm going to give you 5 or 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll do a share out. So how are you going to communicate these goals to students so that they internalize them, like you saw here in these two things? Okay, so let me suggest that you don't use a rubric. Here's why. First of all, to do a good rubric takes a heck of a lot of time and effort. And most rubrics I see, and I'm sorry, it's true, they're not worth the paper they're printed on. Secondly, I'm reluctant to introduce the idea of points in the formative assessment process. I wouldn't want to do that. I see the rubric as much more of a culminating task. But in the lesson, I'd really want to rely on the criteria. So as you were talking, I'm thinking I might break those down a little bit more because, you know, labels were important to you, the diagrams were important to you, all of these things that you want kids to be showing, that they're reflecting those understandings. So as you were talking, I was hearing of those smaller chunks along the way, a bit more fine-grained. And if you're going to use a rubric, I would use it for a culminating task. And then give them some time for revision after that. Yeah, I absolutely don't have a problem with that as the culminating task. This is what you're going to end up doing. All this learning is going to go to here. Here's the kind of things we're going to be looking for. So as we're going through these lessons, so let's keep this in mind. And I would actually give them a bit of time at the end of the lesson to do some self-reflection on the rubric, so make it much more organic. But I would see that as something that you're going to evaluate the final product on, rather than, you know, the more fine-grained criteria that they can. I mean, this is going to be a long block of learning, and I think they need some, even though they're older kids, they need some chunks along the way. And you might not want to introduce them all at once. I mean, in another book, I don't think it's in this book, another book I wrote, I have a high school science teacher, and I don't even know what the goal means. It's something about DNA. And he's got about 15 criteria, but his line is they'll be introduced gradually as, you know, as the learning unfolds over the course of a series of class periods. So that would be my feedback. But I certainly like the models, the kids being able to see that here's the model and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But I need to do this in the context of my own model with my own observations and recording. But that, to me, if I'm a student, I'm sitting here thinking I'm a student, that helps me internalize. Yeah, so thank you for that. That's why I like the idea of you develop hypotheses. You know, you've had these experiences, let's reflect on them, let's pull them together now, thinking about what you already know, what's the relationship you might hypothesize, yeah. But what I like so much about what you've both done is connect it to prior learning and connect it to a bigger picture. And that's really, really nice. And you had some cross-curricular links as well with science, which is great. So, you know, that's one of the connecting it to prior learning. I mean, that's what we know. It's sort of teacher education 101, connect to prior learning. And you all did that. And then what's the new learning? So here's the new learning, and then how will I know if I've learned it? And let me fully understand what it means to learn that. And I think you both did a nice job. And I think if I was sitting there, that's what I was trying to think about. If I knew nothing about what you were talking about, would I get what this lesson's about and what my role in it is? And then could I be able to self-assess, which is a whole other layer to this that we'll get to. So as usual, time is the enemy. But I hope that was useful in terms of the red zone. We'll be in the blue zone next time with the evidence and so on. I can't decide what to do.
What zones are you referring to right
in
now?
the cycle?
Oh,
you know,
okay.
The red zone.
I was thinking of the panic zone and the...
No, we're in the other zone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zoning out.
Yeah, you're zoning out. Actually, you've done very well. It's been an intense day, wouldn't you say? And you've worked very hard and done a lot of thinking. I think if it's okay with Paul, I'm not going to start a new session. I could show you something that might be interesting, but my brain's done. Is your brain? You look to me like your brain's done. Like, don't tell me one more darn thing, right? This is my formative assessment of you. Like, I'm done. But I'm not quite done yet, so don't disappear. Because I have some assignments for you to do. And we'll actually start with the classroom culture next time. We will start with that because I think we're at a point when it'll be useful. So let me just, so summing up and homework. Another one. This I used to, but now a teacher who's done a lot of thinking about formative assessment for at least a year, which is pretty much what I think. I used to think formative assessment was giving more quizzes mid-unit. Yeah, you went along with a lot of other people. Now I think formative assessment is good dialogue, expert observation, thoughtful questioning, and flexible guidance throughout a lesson to ensure every student is on track, each one. And I think, you know, if you look at your criteria and how the way you are crafting these goals and success criteria, I think they're going to generate dialogue. You'll be able to observe, you'll be able to question, and then give that guidance. Somebody had a very nice example just a little bit earlier of how to respond to kids. So, you know, there's a teacher who came into a formative assessment, extended professional learning, thinking he was going to learn more about mid-unit quizzes. And guess what? He found he wasn't. So just to summarize then where we are at the end of the day today. So in the process of formative assessment, and I think you've seen that certainly in Kate Roberts, and we'll see it more with the subsequent videos I show you, that really assessment, teaching and learning blur. I mean, it's very hard to separate them out. You know, like the persuasive writing video I showed you, I mean, that was formative assessment in action, but unless you knew that, you would just look at it and say, well, she's a good teacher. But it's really being able to identify, and I find that with novice teachers, it's helping them see, you know, how this process is embedded in the learning experience. So the lines really blur. So it's not a matter of, you know, parachuting in, or let's do an assessment. although you might do that if it's going to give you valuable information related to your goal, that you can take action. We know that formative assessment can help improve learning for all students. Why? Because you're constantly working from the edge of a particular student, and it's all students. Ta-da! We've worked on that a lot, and you actually have done a very good job. I mean, I'm not just saying that to make you feel good. You actually have done a good job. And I'm hoping that between now and next time that you'll use this experience in your own situations. And then we were going to spend Classroom Culture Impacts, the process of formative assessment, but we will be doing that next time. We'll start with that next time. That'll be our starting point. So those are really the main points that I think we've, and you know, where formative assessment sits in the big comprehensive assessment system. So let's just do some internal check now. This is a little self-reflection at the end of the day. I'm not going to ask you to share it or call it out, but just think, at the end of the day, these are my success criteria. Have I met them? Could you explain what formative assessment is and where it fits in a comprehensive assessment system? Can you describe the components of a feedback loop for formative assessment? Can you explain how learning goals and success criteria drive formative assessment? Can you apply your understanding of learning goals and success criteria to create them? And then, oh, you can't do that one because we haven't done that. Okay, so just think for a moment. This is exactly what I want you to do with your students. You give them time at the end. And then if they haven't met them, the final question becomes, what do you need to learn more about? And again, you put that risk. You see how I'm weaving these small stitches all the time? It's what do you think you need to learn more about? And more often than not, they know. They really do know. So, if you need to learn more, then courtesy of our colleagues here, you have my very wonderful, fantastic book. So you can go back in and, that was a joke, by the way, that's my British humor, but Americans always take it seriously. Oh God, she's got such a big head. That's British humor. Oh, I'm just brilliant, yeah, okay. So these success criteria, you can go back to my brilliant book. And what I'd like you to do, and we might change this, because if you want to use the learning goals and the criteria that you've created in a lesson, then I'd love you to do that. And then bring us some feedback for next time. If you haven't, then I'd like you to at least do it for one lesson. You know, however many class periods you call a lesson. But remember, it's a manageable chunk of time. I would like you to, and you did this bullet, the second bullet, really nicely when we asked how you would share it. And all of you, when you were all doing your learning goals, you were all saying to me, well, what they would have done before is, which is great. So how does it connect to this larger sequence? So important for kids to know, okay, there is a point to this, there is a purpose to my being here. So I'd like you to do that for next time and bring it with you. Paul is very good, kindly going to keep these for us, so we'll get them out next time, and you may want to make some more revisions, or you may just think, yeah, that's absolutely perfect. All right? But we'll keep these, because as we develop these next time in terms of a lesson plan, we'll be thinking about what are the opportunities for evidence in here. That's going to be our focus. It's obtaining classroom culture, obtaining evidence, and acting on evidence next time. So that's your homework. And then in terms of, and I really want you to do this, folks, I would like you to come back, because I think you're a good group and you're worth spending time with. And the only way you get better at doing it is by practicing, right? We know that's incontrovertible. In terms of the book, I was asked what would I like you to read. I think it will be useful to go over. It depends what kind of a learner you are. If you want to read ahead, then read about evidence. whatever chapter that is. But if you want to just revisit some of the ideas that we've talked about today, then you can read the first 2 or 3 chapters. But evidence and acting on it is going to be our focus for next time. Okay, so just going to give you a minute, and then oh, sorry. Ooh. What I'm going to do, you've got my to-do list. See how I have a yellow and a green to-do list? I've got so much to do. Well, I'm certainly invigorated and motivated and excited by working with you. It's been a real pleasure. I wasn't at 4:30 this morning. I thought, why am I even doing this? But I have really enjoyed working with you, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.